Hello guys, welcome to Percy Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy reads Naruto becoming the son of the dragon god Bahamut? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Waking Dragon. The end came with the taste of copper and wet earth. Percy was drowning, not in water, but in a tide of living shadow that poured from the gash in the creature's side. It was a thing that should not have been. A monster wrenched from a nightmare older than the Titans, with too many joints in its limbs and a hide that seemed to drink the moonlight. He'd fought it for what felt like an eternity. The familiar weight of riptide in his hand, the only constant in a swirling chaos of black ichor and snapping, bone-white jaws. His sword was gone, knocked from his grasp moments ago, and his shield, a gift from Tyson, was a crumpled disk of celestial bronze somewhere in the churning mud. The creature's claws, each the size of a dagger, were buried deep in his chest, and the shadows it bled were not merely dark, but cold. A profound, soul-deep chill that was extinguishing the defiant fire of his demigod essence. He could feel his connection to the sea, that constant, comforting thrum in the back of his mind, fading to a whisper. This was it, then. A stupid, unglamorous death in a forgotten corner of the Long Island woods. He thought of his mom, of Annabeth, of Grover. A bitter, final regret. He had saved the world. Twice, and his reward was to be unmade by a monster with no name. As the last of his strength ebbed away, and the shadows began to consume his vision, something deep within him, a core of self that had nothing to do with Poseidon or Sally Jackson, refused to be extinguished. It was an ember of defiance, ancient and proud, and in the absolute, final moment before oblivion, a memory that was not his own bloomed in the darkness of his mind, a sky filled with 1,000 suns, the sweep of immense, metallic wings, and a roar that was the sound of creation itself. A name echoed in the void of his fading consciousness. Bahamut. And then, light. It was not the gentle light of the sun or the soft glow of the moon. It was a pure, searing, platinum brilliance that erupted from the center of his being. It was not hot, but it was absolute. The shadows vaporized. The creature's claws dissolved into black dust. The monster itself, the nameless horror from the dawn of time, was not burned or blasted, but simply erased, as if it had never been. The platinum light pulsed once, a silent shockwave that flattened a circle of trees for 100 yards in every direction, and then it was gone. Percy knew no more. He awoke to the familiar scent of salt air and pine. He was in his cabin, lying on his bunk. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, glinting off the bronze fountain of a fish in the corner. For a moment, everything felt normal. He sat up, expecting the searing agony of the wounds in his chest. There was nothing, not even a scar. He led up his orange camp half-blood t-shirt. The skin was smooth, unbroken. He felt fine. More than fine. He felt a profound sense of well-being, a reservoir of energy that seemed to hum just beneath his skin, as if his very atoms were vibrating at a higher frequency. He swung his legs over the side of the bunk. His movements felt smoother, more precise. The air itself seemed clearer, the colors of the cabin more vibrant. He could hear the distant sounds of the camp with an impossible clarity, the clang of swords in the arena, the laughter from the canoe lake, the rustle of a squirrel's feet on the roof. And there was something else. A new sense, a low, powerful thrum that resonated deep in his bones. It was a feeling of immense, coiled potential, like a thunderstorm held in a bottle. He closed his eyes and focused on it. In his mind's eye, he saw it, a roiling sphere of liquid, platinum energy in the center of his chest. It felt ancient, powerful, and utterly, completely his. He remembered the light, the name, Bahamut. It meant nothing to him, a random word dredged from the depths of his dying mind. But the power felt like coming home. A knock on the door jolted him. Percy, you in there? It was Annabeth. He opened the door, and her concerned gray eyes scanned him from head to toe. You've been out for 2 days, she said, her voice tight with worry. Chiron found you unconscious in the woods. There was a clearing. The trees were just gone. What happened? He opened his mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could he describe the feeling of dying? Of being unmade? Of being reborn? I fought something, he said, his voice raspy. I don't know what it was. I won. Annabeth's brow furrowed. She was the smartest person he knew, and she could always tell when he was holding something back. But this time, she seemed to be looking at him differently, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. You look different. Different how? I don't know, she admitted, shaking her head. Stronger, taller, maybe, and your eyes. He walked over to the small, sea salt-stained mirror above his dresser. His reflection stared back, and for a second, he didn't recognize himself. It was his face, his black hair, his sea-green eyes. But the green was now flecked with shimmering, platinum motes of light, like stars in a nebula. And there was a new intensity to his gaze, a self-possession that hadn't been there before. He looked less like a troubled teenager and more like a king. The feeling was unsettling. He was still Percy Jackson. He had to be, but the person in the mirror seemed to disagree. News of his recovery spread quickly. Soon, he was being escorted by Annabeth to the big house to see Chiron. The centaur's usually calm demeanor was strained. He sat in his wheelchair, his hands clasped tightly on the table before him. Percy, he began, his voice grave. The satyrs who found you reported a massive release of energy. The very air was humming with power they did not recognize. Tell me exactly what you fought. Percy described the creature as best he could. The shifting shadows, the bone-white jaws, the feeling of utter despair it radiated. Chiron's face grew paler with each word. That sounds like a child of Nyx, he murmured. A creature from the age before the gods. They should not be walking the mortal world. He looked at Percy, his ancient eyes filled with a new and disturbing question. How did you survive? A monster of that caliber would have tested even Hercules. I don't know, Percy said, and it was the honest truth. I was losing. And then there was a light. He didn't mention the name. He didn't mention the feeling of power that still coursed through him. He felt a strange, protective instinct over it, a sense that to speak of it would be to invite scrutiny he wasn't ready for. Chiron was a poor liar, and Percy could see the suspicion in his eyes. He was dismissed with a gentle but firm instruction to rest. As he walked out of the big house, he felt the stares of the other campers. Whispers followed him. They had all seen the flattened forest, had all felt the tremor when the platinum light had erupted. They were looking at him not as their hero, the savior of Olympus, but as something new. Something unknown, and therefore, something to be feared. The feeling of isolation was a cold knot in his stomach. He tried to brush it off, to fall back into the familiar routines of camp life. He headed to the arena, hoping the familiar ritual of sword fighting would ground him. Clarice Leroux was there, of course, hammering some poor Ares camper into the dust. She saw Percy enter, and a cruel grin spread across her face. Well, look what the hellhound dragged in. Heard you took a little nap in the woods, Percy. Feeling up for a real fight. Normally, Percy would have fired back a sarcastic retort. But today, the words felt hollow. The taunt was childish, a gnat buzzing around a lion's ear. He just looked at her, his platinum-flecked eyes calm and steady. His silence seemed to infuriate her more than any insult could have. What's wrong, Jackson? Scared, she hefted her electric spear. Maimer. Let's see if I can't wake you up. She charged. She was fast, a blur of motion and raw aggression. In the past, their fights had been brutal, drawn-out affairs, a clash of his fluid, unpredictable style against her overwhelming force. This time, it wasn't a fight. It was a demonstration. The world seemed to slow down. He saw every twitch of her muscles, every flicker of her eyes. He saw the path of her spear before she even thrust it. He didn't draw a riptide. He didn't need to. He sidestepped her charge, his movement so fluid it was almost casual. His hand shot out and caught the shaft of her spear. There was no jolt, no struggle. He simply stopped it. Clarice, propelled by her own momentum, stumbled forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. The air crackled. As the electricity from her spear arced harmlessly around his hand. He held her weapon, her prized symbol of strength, and looked her in the eye. The arena had gone silent. Every camper had stopped to watch. This is beneath you, Clarice, he said, his voice quiet but carrying with an unnatural resonance. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement of fact. Her face flushed with a mixture of rage and humiliation. She tried to yank the spear back, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if he were an extension of the bedrock beneath the arena. She let out a roar of frustration and threw a punch with her free hand, aiming for his face. He caught her fist, his fingers wrapping around hers with a gentleness that was more insulting than any blow. The difference in their strength was absolute. He could feel the bones in her hand. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that he could crush them to powder with a thought. He didn't. He simply held her there, her spear in one hand, her fist in the other. Her rage breaking against his immovable calm. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he snapped her spear in two. The celestial bronze shaft, a weapon that had survived countless battles, hattered with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent arena. He let the two pieces clatter to the ground. He released her hand. Clarice stared at the broken pieces of her spear, then at him, her face a mask of shocked disbelief. There was no triumph in his eyes, no arrogance. There was only a profound, unshakable certainty. He turned and walked away, the other campers parting before him as if the sea itself had commanded it. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had not been trying to humiliate her. He had simply been acting the way a river flows or the wind blows. It was his new nature. As he reached the edge of the arena, he felt a new gaze upon him. It was different from the fearful stares of the campers. This was a gaze of assessment, of unnerving, analytical intensity. He scanned the edge of the woods that bordered the camp and saw her, for just a fleeting second. A figure, cloaked and hooded, standing perfectly still in the shadows of a pine tree. She was too far away for any normal person to see, but his new senses picked her out with ease. He couldn't see her face, but he could feel the weight of her attention, a focused pressure against his mind. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone, melting back into the shadows. Percy stood there, the broken pieces of Clarice's spear behind him, and the disquieting memory of the cloaked figure before him. The world he had known, the life he had fought so hard to protect, was slipping through his fingers. He had won the battle in the woods, but in doing so, he had unleashed something far more powerful and far more dangerous, himself. The sun was warm on his skin, but for the first time in his life, Percy Jackson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. It was the chill of the unknown, the terrifying, exhilarating thrill of a power he was only just beginning to understand. The demigod was gone. The dragon was awake. Chapter 1 end. Chapter 2. The whispering deep. The familiar comfort of the sea was gone. Percy stood waist-deep in the calm waters of the canoe lake, the late morning sun warming his shoulders. For his entire life, this had been his sanctuary, a place where he felt a connection not just to the water itself, but to the very essence of his father. He could feel the currents, sense the fish darting in the reeds, even hear the slow, patient thoughts of the naiads who slumbered in the cool mud below. Now, it was different. He reached out with his senses, expecting the usual gentle thrum of Poseidon's domain. The water still obeyed him. With a flick of his wrist, he could raise a spinning vortex or send a perfectly aimed jet of water to splash an unsuspecting stole brother on the far shore. But the feeling was hollow. It was like speaking a language he'd once known intimately, only to find the accent had changed, the familiar idioms replaced with something foreign and strange. The water felt less like an extension of himself and more like a subject, I fully and fearfully obeying the command of a new master. Closing his eyes, he pushed his senses deeper, past the familiar currents of the lake, past the groundwater veins that spider-webbed beneath the camp, reaching out into the vast, open expanse of the Atlantic. He was searching for his father, for that familiar, reassuring presence that had always been a distant anchor in the storm of his life. He found nothing. Or rather, he found something else entirely. As his consciousness swept out into the crushing, silent blackness of the abyss, a presence stirred. It was not the temperamental, earthy power of Poseidon. This was older, vaster, and infinitely more powerful. It was a consciousness that felt less like a god and more like a living ocean itself, a dormant, reptilian awareness that had slumbered for eons in the crushing pressure of the deepest trenches. And as Percy's mind touched it, it did not greet him as a son. It recognized him as an equal, a kin. It stirred in its ancient sleep, a low, tectonic hum that vibrated not through the water, but through the very fabric of reality. It was the whisper of a dragon, and it was calling to the dragon in him. Percy pulled his senses back with a gasp. Stumbling in the shallows, the water around him swirled in agitation. The power he had felt was terrifying in its scope, a sleeping giant he had accidentally prodded. And it was waiting for him. The sea was no longer his father's house. It was his own, unclaimed kingdom. "I thought I'd find you here." Annabeth's voice cut through his turmoil. She was standing on the dock, her arms crossed. Her expression a familiar mix of concern and analytical curiosity. Her gray eyes, which could dissect a battle plan or a blueprint with equal ease, were fixed on him, trying to solve the puzzle he had become. "You're avoiding everyone. Just thinking," he said, wading out of the water. He felt a pang of guilt. He had barely spoken to her since he woke up. How could he explain the chasm that had opened between his past and present self? "Thinking or brooding?" she countered, her lips quirking into a small, sad smile. "Come on, seaweed brain. Let's go to the arena. Whatever this is, maybe you can sweat it out." He wanted to refuse. The memory of his encounter with Clarice was still fresh, the feeling of that effortless, absolute power a disquieting presence. He didn't want to risk losing control, especially not with Annabeth, but the look in her eyes, the plea for him to be the Percy she knew, was something he couldn't deny. The arena was mostly empty, the midday tea having driven most campers to the lake or the shade of the forest. Annabeth tossed him a celestial bronze sword. Its weight felt wrong in his hand, flimsy and unbalanced. He missed the familiar feel of riptide, which he had left in his cabin. He felt he didn't deserve to carry it until he understood what he had become. "Standard rules," she said, drawing her own dagger, a gift from her mother, Athena. "First to be disarmed loses." They began to circle each other. In the past, their spars were a beautiful, deadly dance. His unpredictable, flowing style against her precise, strategic bladework. They knew each other's moves, each other's feints and tells. It had always been a battle of equals. Annabeth lunged, a classic feint to the shoulder followed by a quick slash at his legs. It was a move that had caught him off guard 100 times. This time, he saw it coming before she even began to move. He saw the intention in her eyes, the slight shift of her weight, the tightening of the muscles in her arm. The world seemed to move in slow motion as he parried her dagger with a lazy, almost dismissive flick of his sword. She recovered instantly, her expression hardening. She moved faster, her attacks coming in a relentless, intelligent flurry. It was like trying to fight a whirlwind of razor blades. But for Percy, the whirlwind was moving at a snail's pace. He stepped, parried, and deflected. His movements economical and impossibly fluid. He wasn't even breathing hard. He was just reacting. The frustration was building in her face. She was using every trick, every strategy she had ever devised. And none of it was working. He was a stone wall, an immovable object against her unstoppable force. "Fight back," she grunted, sweat beading on her brow as she disengaged and took a deep breath. "What are you doing?" "I am," he replied, and his voice was calmer than he felt. She let out a frustrated yell and came at him with a renewed fury. This time, she didn't aim for his sword. She feinted high and then dropped low, her dagger slashing towards the gap in his armor at his waist. It was a brilliant, unexpected move. It should have worked. Percy didn't have time to move his sword. He didn't have time to dodge. Instinct took over. He threw up his left hand, and the platinum energy he had felt humming in his chest flared to life. It wasn't a conscious act. It was a reflex, as natural as blinking. A shimmering, semi-transparent shield, no bigger than a dinner plate, materialized an inch from his skin. It glowed with an soft, internal light, intricate, fractal patterns swirling across its surface like frost on a windowpane. Annabeth's dagger struck the shield. There was no clang of metal on metal. There was only a soft, resonant chime, like a striking bell. The force of her blow was completely absorbed. The celestial bronze blade, a weapon forged in the heart of Olympus, vibrated violently, and a spiderweb of cracks appeared on its surface. Annabeth stumbled back, her eyes wide with shock, staring at her damaged dagger and then at the shimmering shield that had just faded from existence around Percy's hand. The arena was silent, save for the sound of their breathing. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Percy looked at his own hand, a profound sense of dread and awe washing over him. I don't know. The distance between them had never felt greater. It wasn't just a matter of power anymore. It was a difference in their very nature. He was something new, something that defied the rules of their world. And in that moment, he saw it in her eyes. Not just concern, but the first glimmer of fear. Before either of them could say another word, the air in the center of the arena began to shimmer. A rainbow appeared, and the scent of ozone filled the air. An iris message, but it wasn't his father's gruff face or Hermes' mischievous grin that materialized. It was the stern, ageless face of Artemis, her silver eyes glowing with a cold fury. "Perseus Jackson," she said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. She had always shown him a grudging respect, but that was gone now. "Lady Artemis," Percy said, bowing his head slightly. "Annabeth did the same. A sanctuary of mine has been violated," the goddess said, her voice like chipping ice. "Less than a mile from the borders of your camp. The silver stag of Serenia, a creature of immense age and sacred to my hunt, has been slain." Percy felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He remembered the stories. The stag was a legendary beast, so fast it could outrun an arrow. Its antlers made of pure gold. It was one of Hercules' labors to capture it alive. "How?" Annabeth asked, her voice hushed. "What monster could catch it?" Artemis's silver eyes narrowed, and her gaze fell solely on Percy. "It was not caught. It was unmade, drained of its very life force, its divine essence consumed. There was no monster sign, no tracks, no scent of ichor. There was only the lingering trace of a power I have not felt in millennia. An ancient, predatory power." The accusation was unspoken, but it hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. A new power had emerged. A sacred creature was dead. The timing was too perfect. "I was in the camp," Percy said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "I haven't left." "So your followers claim," Artemis said, her lip curling in a slight sneer. "But power like the kind that was unleashed in these woods 2 days ago has a long reach. And a hunger. Be warned, son of Poseidon. My brother may be lenient, but an attack on my hunt is an attack on me. And I do not grant second chances." The iris message dissolved, leaving Percy and Annabeth standing in the silent arena, the goddess's threat echoing in the hot air. That night, sleep offered no escape. Percy's dreams were a chaotic maelstrom of platinum light, abyssal depths, and cold, silver eyes. He gave up trying to rest and walked out of his cabin, He need for solitude and open space a gnawing ache in his soul. He found himself on the beach, the waves gently lapping at the sand. The moon was a sliver of silver in the inky black sky. He sat on the cool sand and tried to meditate, to reach for the roiling sphere of energy in his chest. He needed to understand it, to control it. If he was going to be accused of wielding it like a weapon, he had to at least know how to aim it. As he focused, sinking into the calm, steady rhythm of his own power, he felt it again. The watching presence, a focused, analytical gaze that felt like a physical weight against his skin. This time, it was closer, much closer. He didn't open his eyes. He extended his new senses, not with the brute force of his demigod abilities, but with a delicate, precise touch. He felt the life force of the sleeping campers in their cabins, the nocturnal animals in the forest, the naiads in the lake. And he felt one consciousness that was different from all the others. It was a point of absolute stillness. A deep well of ancient, patient energy. It was perched on the roof of the big house, cloaked in shadows, observing him. "I know you're there," Percy said, his voice carrying easily on the quiet night air. "You can either stay up there and watch, or you can come down and talk." For a long moment, there was no response. Then, with a movement so silent and fluid, it was more like a shadow detaching itself from the darkness, a figure dropped from the roof of the big house. It landed on the sand without a sound and glided towards him. It was the same cloaked and hooded individual he had seen in the woods. As the figure drew closer, he could make out more details. The cloak was a deep, starless black, and it seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. The figure was slender, and moved with an inhuman grace. It stopped 10 feet from him. "Your senses are remarkable, Dragon Son," a voice said from the depths of the hood. It was a woman's voice, melodic and clear. but with an underlying timbre of immense age and authority. It was a voice that had spoken commands and witnessed the birth of empires. "Who are you?" Percy asked, getting to his feet. He wasn't afraid. The power humming inside him felt like a coiled serpent, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. "I am a chronicler," she said simply. "My purpose is to observe and record. My order has watched the ebb and flow of power on this world since before the gods you worship first climbed their mountain. Why are you watching me?" "Because an event we have long anticipated has come to pass," the chronicler said, her hidden face turning towards the sky. "An awakening. The dormant blood of the dragon god has awakened in a mortal vessel. Your power is not of this world, Percy Jackson. It is a remnant of the first creation, a power that predates the Olympians, the Titans, and even Gaia herself." Bahamut. The name echoed in his mind. The dying memory. It was real. "What do you want?" Percy asked, his hand instinctively balling into a fist. "To warn you," she replied, her tone becoming urgent. "The gods fear what they do not understand, and they seek to destroy what they fear. The death of Artemis's stag. It was not your doing. It was a message, a carefully crafted move on a cosmic chessboard. Someone wants to paint your newfound power as a destructive, uncontrollable force. They are forcing Olympus's hand. Who? I do not know, but I know this. Olympus will not send a delegation to ask questions. They will not risk a diplomatic approach. When faced with a threat of this magnitude, they have only one response." The chronicler's words sent a chill down Percy's spine. As if on cue, the air grew suddenly, unnaturally cold. The sliver of moon in the sky seemed to blaze with a harsh, unforgiving silver light. The chronicler looked towards the woods. "They are here," she whispered, and with a movement that was faster than sight, she dissolved into the shadows, vanishing as if she had never been there. Percy spun around, facing the dark tree line. He felt it before he saw it. A wave of divine power, cold and sharp and utterly without mercy. A volley of silver arrows, at least a dozen of them, burst from the woods. They did not fly. They teleported, streaking across the distance in an instant, each one aimed at his heart. They hummed with a power that made the air vibrate. A power designed to unmake gods. There was no time to think. No time to draw a weapon he did not have. There was only instinct. The platinum energy within his chest didn't just flare. It erupted. It poured out of him, not as a blinding flash of light, but as something solid, something real. It formed in front of him, a shimmering, translucent shield of pure force, shaped like the sweeping, elegant curve of a dragon's wing. The surface of the shield was covered in glowing, interlocking scales of light. The silver arrows of Artemis, weapons that could fell a titan, slammed into the draconic wing. The impact was silent. There was no explosion, no crash. The arrows, humming with divine, absolute purpose, simply ceased to exist. They shattered against the platinum shield, disintegrating into motes of silver dust that scattered on the cold night wind. The silence that followed was more profound than any sound. Percy stood on the beach, the shattered remnants of divine judgment at his feet. The glowing, ethereal wing of light slowly fading before him. From the darkness of the woods, a figure emerged. It was a man, tall and lean, clad in silver armor that seemed to be woven from moonlight itself. His eyes glowed with the same cold, silver light as the arrows, and he held a silver spear that crackled with contained power. This was no monster. This was no demigod. This was something else. A divine hunter. An executioner. He looked at the dissipating dust of his arrows, then at Percy, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "So," the hunter said, his voice the sound of a blade being sharpened on stone. "The rumors are true. A new god is born." He raised his spear. "My name is Orion, and on behalf of Lord Zeus, I am here to witness your death." Percy looked at the divine executioner, at the spear aimed at his heart, and felt no fear. Only a cold, crystalline certainty. He had been a pawn for the gods his entire life. He had fought their wars, cleaned up their messes. Now, they had sent their hunter to put him down like a rabid dog. But the boy they were hunting was already gone. He raised his hands, and the platinum energy swirled around them, coiling like living serpents. The dragon was awake, and it was hungry. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Hunter and the Hunted. Orion didn't wait for an answer. He moved with a speed that was not of the mortal world. A silver blur against the dark sand. He didn't charge. He flowed, each step silent and perfectly placed, his spear a gleaming extension of his lethal intent. The tip of the weapon didn't just threaten to pierce, it hummed with a divine energy that promised to unravel Percy's very existence. Percy's mind, newly expanded and impossibly fast, processed it all. He saw the trajectory of the spear, the tightening of Orion's grip, the cold, emotionless focus in his silver eyes. There was no rage, no malice. It was the detached efficiency of an executioner. This was a job, and Percy was the target. Instinct, raw and primal, took over. The platinum energy that coiled around his hands erupted, not as a shield this time, but as a weapon. A shimmering, semi-translucent claw of pure light, 3 feet long and razor-sharp, materialized over his right hand. He didn't swing it like a sword. He slashed, the movement as natural as a beast of prey striking at a rival. Platinum claw met silver spear. The impact was not a clang of metal but a deafening shriek of competing energies. The air itself seemed to tear, a corona of brilliant white light exploding at the point of contact. The beach shook. The waves, 100 feet away, recoiled as if struck by an invisible fist, then surged back in a chaotic froth. Orion was thrown back, his boots skidding across the sand, leaving 2 deep furrows. He stared at the tip of his spear, which now glowed a dull, angry red where it had touched the platinum claw. A flicker of surprise, the first crack in his perfect composure, showed in his eyes. Percy stood his ground, the spectral claw dissipating into harmless motes of light. The sheer feedback of the impact vibrated up his arm, but it wasn't painful. It was informative. He could feel the nature of Orion's power, cold, absolute, a focused application of divine law. It was powerful, but it was rigid, unchanging. His own power was something else entirely. It was fluid, adaptable, alive. Impressive, Orion conceded, his voice a low growl. He spun his spear, the motion a blur of silver light. But a cornered animal always has one good strike in it. Let's see if you have a second. He came again, but this time his attack was different. He didn't thrust. He swept the spear in a wide, horizontal arc, unleashing a crescent-shaped wave of pure silver energy that screamed across the sand, slicing through the air itself. It was an attack that couldn't be blocked by a single claw. It would cut him in half. Percy didn't try to block it. He didn't try to dodge. He stomped his foot on the ground. It wasn't a physical act of aggression. It was a command. He pushed a pulse of his own life force, his draconic energy, into the earth beneath him. The sand responded, with a deep, groaning roar. A solid wall of sand, 10 feet high and 5 feet thick, erupted from the beach. It was not the loose, shifting sand of the shore. It was packed hard, fused together by his will, the individual grains glowing with faint platinum light. The silver crescent slammed into the wall. It carved a deep, sizzling gash into the sand, melting the grains into a glassy, black scar, but the wall held. The attack was spent. Before the fused sand could crumble, Percy lunged, not at Orion, but through his own makeshift wall. He didn't run through it, he simply passed through it, the energized sand parting before him and sealing behind him as if he were a ghost. He burst from the other side, appearing directly in front of a momentarily startled Orion. He didn't summon a claw this time. He just punched. His fist, wreathed in a soft platinum glow, was not aimed at Orion's face or chest, but at the shaft of the silver spear. The punch connected. The sound was a thunderclap and a bell chime happening at once. Orion's divine weapon, a tool of execution gifted by Zeus himself, did not just break. It shattered into 1,000 glittering shards of silver light, the divine energies holding it together violently undone. Orion stared at the empty haft in his hands, his face a mask of pure, undiluted shock. Everything had happened too fast. The wall, the phasing, the impossibly powerful strike. He had come to hunt a rogue demigod. He was facing something he could not comprehend. Percy didn't press the advantage. He stepped back, his fist still glowing softly. He could feel the divine energy from the shattered spear dissipating into the air, a phantom chill on his skin. He had felt the life force of the weapon, the will of Zeus and Hephaestus that bound it. And he had simply told it to stop. "It's over, Orion," Percy said, his voice calm. Go back to Olympus. Tell them to leave me alone. Orion's shock curdled into pure, incandescent rage. The hunter's composure was gone, replaced by the fury of a slighted god. You think breaking my spear wins you this war? You are an abomination, an anomaly that must be purged. His body began to glow with a blinding silver light. The air pressure dropped, and the temperature plummeted. The sand around his feet frosted over. He was gathering his power, his true divine essence, preparing to unleash it all in one final, cataclysmic blast. He was no longer a hunter, he was a living weapon of divine judgment. Percy felt the shift in power, the sheer, overwhelming force of it. His own draconic energy surged in response, a rising tide of platinum fire ready to meet the silver storm. This was it, a battle that would not just level the beach, but could potentially wipe Camp Half-Blood off the map. He braced himself, ready to unleash a power he barely understood, knowing it could consume him as easily as his enemy. And then, a new voice, quiet and sharp, cut through the tension from the shadows of the dunes. He's not your real enemy, Hunter. Both Percy and Orion turned. The chronicler stood on the crest of a sand dune, her black robes a void against the starlit sky. Her hood was still up, but her voice carried an authority that made even the enraged Orion pause. Who are you to interfere in the affairs of the gods? Orion snarled, the silver light around him pulsing like a furious star. A historian, the chronicler replied, her tone even. And I am telling you that you are a tool. Ask yourself, Orion, who benefits from this conflict? Who guided your hunt to the Ceranian stag? Who ensured that every sign would point to the one being on this earth with a new, unknown power? Orion hesitated. The questions were like barbs, finding purchase even in his divine rage. The chronicler continued, her voice weaving through the tense silence. The essence of the stag was not just drained. It was corrupted, twisted. It was a ritualistic slaying, designed to mimic the signature of a predatory life force consumer. It was a perfect frame, and you, the great hunter, walked right into the trap. Percy listened, a cold realization dawning on him. The chronicler was right. It was too neat. A new power appears. A sacred creature dies in a way that seems to match it. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a move. Someone was playing a much larger game, and he and Olympus were just pieces on the board. Orion's silver glow began to fade, his fury being replaced by a sliver of doubt. Lies, he hissed, but the conviction in his voice was gone. Zeus himself sanctioned this mission. And who whispered in the All-Father's ear? The chronicler pressed. Who fanned the flames of his paranoia? You are hunting a shadow, Orion, while the true threat gathers its strength in the darkness. You are being used. The hunter looked from the enigmatic chronicler to Percy, who stood calm and ready, his power held in a delicate, dangerous balance. He saw the broken haft of his spear, the shattered remnants of his authority. He saw the sand fused into black glass. He saw a power that did not belong in his world, but he also saw a control, a restraint, that did not match the profile of a mindless, hungry beast. With a curse that made the air curdle, Orion made his decision. He was a hunter, not a fool. To continue this fight now, fueled by doubt, was to risk not just defeat, but annihilation. This changes nothing. Anomaly. He spat at Percy, his voice dripping with venom. I will find the truth. And when I do, I will return. Pray that you are not at the center of it. In a ash of brilliant silver light that momentarily blinded Percy, Orion was gone. The divine pressure vanished. The unnatural cold dissipated. All that was left was the quiet murmur of the waves and the lingering scent of ozone. Percy stood on the scarred and broken beach, the adrenaline slowly leaving him. He had faced a divine assassin and won. He had shattered a godly weapon with his bare hands. He should have felt victorious. He only felt a profound sense of dread. He turned to the chronicler, who was now gliding down the dune towards him. Thank you, he said. I did not intervene to save you, she replied, her voice losing its sharp, commanding edge and returning to its melodic, observational tone. I intervened to preserve the balance. A direct conflict between you and Olympus now would be premature. Your true enemy wants you to exhaust your strength fighting the gods while they remain hidden. Who is it? Percy demanded. Who is doing this? I do not know their name, the chronicler admitted. But I know their nature. They are like you, a vessel for a power that is not of this world. But where your power is that of creation, of life itself, the essence of the platinum dragon, theirs is the opposite. It is the power of the void dragon, the eater of light, the silence between the stars. An ancient and eternal rival. Before Percy could ask another question, he heard Isis shouting his name from the direction of the camp. Annabeth, Grover, several campers, all running towards the beach, drawn by the sounds and flashes of light from the battle. You must go, Percy said to the chronicler. They can't see you. My presence here is concluded, she said, already beginning to fade back into the shadows. A word of advice, dragon son. The gods see you as a weapon. Your friends see you as a monster. Your enemies see you as a key. It is time you decided what you see yourself as. With that, she was gone, leaving Percy alone to face the approaching lights and the frantic calls of his friends. Annabeth was the first to reach him. Her eyes took in the scene in a single, horrified glance, the deep furrows in the sand, the wall of fused glass, the glittering dew. Saint of the shattered spear that still hung in the air. Her gaze finally landed on him, standing untouched in the center of the devastation. Percy, what happened? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The fear he had seen in her eyes in the arena was back, magnified 100 times. He looked at her, at the genuine terror and confusion on her face. He looked at Grover, who was peering at the destruction with wide, frightened eyes. He saw the other campers, the children of Ares and Apollo and Hermes, all stopping a safe distance away, their swords drawn, looking at him as if he were the monster. The chronicler's words echoed in his mind. It is time you decided what you see yourself as. He was no longer just Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon. He was something more, something other, and to pretend otherwise, to try and fit back into the life he had known, would not only be a lie, it would be dangerous. It would put all of them in the path of a war they weren't equipped to fight. He looked at Annabeth, the girl he had been through Tartarus with, and a painful decision settled in his heart. To protect them, he had to push them away. A misunderstanding, he said, his voice colder and more distant than he intended. It's been dealt with. He turned and walked away, not towards his cabin, but down the length of the beach, away from the camp, away from the lights, away from the life he had once known. Each step was a choice, a declaration. The hunt was over, but the war had just begun. He was no longer the hunted. From this moment on, he was the hunter. And his first prey was the shadow that had set him on this path. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Echoes in the Concrete Sea. The walk away from Camp Half-Blood was the longest of Percy's life. With every step that took him further down the moonlit beach, he could feel the invisible threads connecting him to his past stretching, fraying, and finally snapping. He could hear Annabeth calling his name, her voice a mixture of confusion and hurt. But he didn't turn back. To turn back would be to lie, to pretend he was still the boy she knew, and that lie would get them all killed. The chronicler's words echoed in the sudden, vast emptiness of his mind. It is time you decided what you see yourself as. He wasn't a demigod anymore. The power of the sea god in his veins was a whisper compared to the roaring, platinum inferno of the dragon. He was something older, something more primal, and his problems were no longer the squabbles of the Olympians. He had an enemy who could frame him for divine murder, an enemy who wielded a power that was the dark mirror of his own. A void dragon. He needed answers, and he knew he wouldn't find them at Camp Half-Blood. Their knowledge was filtered through the lens of Olympus, their history written by the victors. The chronicler, Kasha, had called herself a historian of powers that predated the gods. That meant there had to be records, traces left behind in the world, hidden from the eyes of gods and men. He didn't head for a magical landmark or a hidden mythical library. He walked until he hit the road, flagged the first pre-dawn bus heading into Manhattan, and paid the F.A.R.E. with $100 bill he'd manifested from a flicker of platinum energy. The driver just grunted and waved him on. By the time the sun was casting long shadows between the skyscrapers, Percy W. as standing in front of the New York Public Library, the stone lions on either side of the steps regarding him with their silent, patient gazes. The city was a sensory overload. His new awareness, W.H. It had felt so sharp and clear in the relative quiet of the camp, was now a roaring cacophony. He could feel the thrum of the subway deep beneath his feet, the collective life force of millions of people rushing past him. The hum of electricity in the walls, the whisper of data through fiber optic cables. It was a sea of information, and for a moment, he felt himself drowning in it. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and focused. He didn't try to block the noise out. Instead, he let it flow through him, finding the patterns, the rhythms. He sorted the sensory data, categorizing it, filtering it, until the roar subsided into a manageable, complex symphony. He could feel individual heartbeats in the crowd, smell the distant scent of roasting nuts from a street vendor 3 blocks away, see the stress fractures in the concrete beneath his shoes. He was connected to the city in a way he had never been before, an urban dragon in a sea of concrete and steel. And he could feel that he was being watched. It wasn't the calm, analytical presence of the chronicler. This was a different kind of attention. It was hungry, predatory. A discordant note in the city's symphony. It was the feeling of a shark circling in the depths. Silent and waiting. He didn't look for it. Acknowledging it would be tipping his hand. He walked up the steps and into the vast, hushed halls of the library, the feeling of being hunted, a cold weight between his shoulder blades. He didn't know what he was looking for. A name, a symbol. He let his instincts guide him, his new senses attuned to whispers of NT power that might cling to old paper and ink. He bypassed the main reading room, the computers, the modern collections. He followed a faint, almost imperceptible hum of energy down to the archives. To the collections of pre-Olympian mythology, of forgotten religions and Gnostic texts. He found a book, a heavy, leather-bound tome on Babylonian creation myths. As his fingers brushed the spine, he felt a spark, a faint resonance with his own energy. He sat at a dusty, secluded table and opened it. Most of it was scholarly and dry, but then he saw it. A small, woodcut illustration in the margin of a chapter on primordial deities. It depicted a great, serpentine dragon, coiled around the nascent universe. Its scales were described as being the color of polished platinum. Its name, according to the text, was Bahamut, the god of life and creation, the first breath of the cosmos. And opposite it, on the facing page, was another illustration. A creature of pure blackness, a hole in the shape of a dragon, swallowing stars. The text called it Tiamat, the Void Mother, the Last Silence. As he read the names, the predatory presence he'd felt outside intensified. It was close now. In the library, he closed the book, the pieces clicking into place. The death of the stag, the frame up, it was all a distraction, designed to draw Olympus's attention while his real enemy closed in. He stood up and walked calmly out of the archives. Not back towards the main entrance, but towards a fire exit he'd noted on his way in. He pushed the bar and stepped out into a narrow, grimy alleyway choked with dumpsters and smelling of stale garbage. The brick walls rose high on either side, blocking out the sun. It was a perfect trap. The shadows in the deepest part of the alley began to coalesce. They didn't just darken, they writhed, twisting into a form that seemed to defy geometry. It was similar to the beast that had nearly killed him in the woods, but this one was sleeker, more refined. It had the rough shape of a massive wolf. But its fur was made of shifting, semi-solid shadow, and its eyes were points of cold, hungry void. A low growl emanated from it, a sound that was not a vibration of the air, but a direct, nauseating pressure on the mind. A void hound. Percy didn't reach for a weapon. He let the platinum energy flow, not into a grand, defensive gesture, but into his own body. It reinforced his muscles, sharpened his senses to a razor's edge, and coated his hands and forearms in a shimmering, metallic sheen. The void hound lunged, crossing the 30 feet of the alley in a silent, impossible instant. Its jaws, filled with teeth of solidified darkness, snapped shut where Percy's head had been a microsecond before. Percy had moved, not with the explosive burst of a demigod, but with a fluid, serpentine grace that seemed to bend the space around him. He was behind the creature now. He drove his right hand, sheathed in its platinum gauntlet, forward in a palm-heel strike. He didn't aim for the creature's head or spine. He aimed for the center of its shadowy mass, the point where its connection to its master would be strongest. The impact was silent. A shockwave of pure white light erupted from his palm, and the hound's form flickered violently, its growl turning into a high-pitched psychic shriek. It was not a creature of flesh and blood, it was a construct of pure negative energy. And he had just hit it with a dose of its polar opposite. It spun, its shadowy claws tearing through the air, leaving trails of black energy that sizzled and evaporated. Percy moved with it, a whirlwind of controlled, precise motion. He didn't need a sword. He shaped the platinum energy around his hands into short, curved blades of light, like miniature dragon claws. He ducked under a sweeping attack and drove a glowing talon up into the creature's underbelly. He parried a snapping jaw with one blade and raked the other across the creature's flank. Each strike was not just a physical blow, but an injection of life and creation energy into a being of pure void. It was like pouring water into a fire. The hound's form began to destabilize, its shadows fraying at the edges. Its movements growing more erratic. It was a hunter, yes, but it was hunting a demigod. It was not prepared for a dragon. With a final, desperate roar, the creature dissolved its physical form, becoming a swirling vortex of shadow that shot towards Percy, attempting to engulf and consume him from within. Percy stood his ground. Bad idea, he murmured. He didn't erect a shield. He opened his mind. He let the vortex hit him. And as the cold, life-draining energy of the void washed over him, he simply expanded his own presence. From the center of his chest, the roiling sphere of platinum energy pulsed. A miniature sun in the heart of a storm of darkness. The light didn't just push the shadows back, it saturated them, filled them, overriding their void nature with its own creative force. The psychic shriek of the hound was cut short. The swirling shadows around Percy vaporized, turning into nothing more than a faint, foul-smelling mist. The alley was empty again. Percy stood breathing steadily, the platinum glow around his hands fading. The fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. It wasn't a struggle, it was an extermination. As the last of the creature's energy dissipated, he noticed something was different. Unlike the monsters of his past, it wasn't turning to golden dust. Its essence was being pulled, vacuumed away through a pinprick in reality, recalled by its master. And as the last of it vanished, a tiny object fell to the grimy asphalt with a faint click. It was a shard of what looked like black glass, an inch long, shaped like a dragon's tooth. It was unnaturally smooth and absorbed all light. A sliver of pure physical darkness. He knelt and picked it up. It was cold, a profound, soul-deep cold that seemed to drink the warmth from his fingers. It hummed with an energy that was the perfect, jarring antithesis of his own. It was a breadcrumb, efficient, and ruthless. I approve. Percy didn't start. He'd felt her presence the moment the fight ended. He stood and turned. The chronicler, Kasha, stepped out from behind a dumpster, her black robes immaculate, her hooded face unreadable. You led it to me, Percy stated. It wasn't a question. I did not need to, Kasha corrected him. It was already tracking you from the moment you left your sanctuary. Your power is a beacon in the darkness for its kind. I merely observed to see if you were the warrior your bloodline promised. Or merely a child with a powerful new toy. And what's the verdict? Percy asked, his voice flat. The former, clearly, she said. You did not fight like a demigod, relying on brute force or divine tricks. You fought like a dragon, with economy, precision, and an innate understanding of your enemy's nature. You struck its essence, not its form. She gestured to the obsidian shard in his hand. That is a resonant anchor. A piece of the creature's core that has been severed from its master. It is a key. A key to what? To finding them, Kasha said. The vessel of Tiamat, your opposite, your enemy. The anchor still resonates with the source of its power. With the right focus, it can be used to pinpoint their location. But not here. To activate its scrying properties, you need a place where the lines of power are ancient and deep. A nexus of human belief that predates the Olympians. Like where? Percy asked, his gaze locked on the shard. He finally had a tangible piece of his enemy. A direction. Kasha seemed to almost smile, though it was impossible to tell beneath her hood. The gods of this land are young and loud. Their power is potent, but shallow. We need to go somewhere older. A place where kings and dragons are not just myths, but history woven into the very stone. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We are going to London. To the tower. It was built on a site of pagan worship, a nexus of draconic energy that has been dormant for centuries. It is the perfect place to awaken the anchor's power. London. The tower. The names felt distant, foreign, part of a world he had never considered. But it made a strange kind of sense. He had to leave this life behind, and that meant leaving this country, this continent. He looked down at the shard, then back at Kasha. Who are you, really? Why are you helping me? I told you, I am a chronicler. My order exists to maintain the balance, she said. The vessel of Tiamat seeks to consume all things, to return the universe to the silence from which it came. You, the vessel of Bahamut, are the counterweight. Life against the void, creation against the entropy. It is not a matter of good versus evil. It is a matter of cosmic necessity. If you fall, everything falls. Therefore, it is my duty to ensure you are properly equipped for your role. She produced a small, leather pouch. You will need this. Mortal currency, identification that will pass any scrutiny, a few other necessities. Consider it a research grant. Percy stood in the grimy Manhattan alley. The hum of the city a distant backdrop. In his hand, he held a sliver of his enemy's soul. Before him stood a woman from an ancient order he didn't understand, offering him a ticket to a new continent and a new war. The fear and confusion he'd felt leaving camp were gone, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged clarity. This was his path now. He was no longer reacting to the gods, games or his enemy's plots. He was taking the first step on his own hunt. He took the pouch from Kasha. When do we leave? Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Serpent in the Tower. London was a graveyard of ghosts. That was Percy's first coherent thought as he and Kasha emerged from the surreal, instantaneous journey that had deposited them in a quiet mews behind a Paddington hotel. New York was a raw, chaotic symphony of the present moment, a city of fleeting ambitions and immediate desires. London was different. Its energy was deeper, layered, and saturated with the psychic residue of centuries. As they walked, his senses, which he was learning to fine-tune with ever-increasing precision, tasted the echoes in the air. He could feel the faint, lingering terror that clung to the cobblestones of a particular alleyway. The ghost of a Victorian-era murder. He could sense the phantom joy that resonated from the ancient wood of a pub doorway where generations had celebrated. It wasn't just a city, it was a palimpsest. And he could read every overlapping layer of its history. He was a dragon, and the memories of the land were like the scent of prey on the wind. You're adapting. Cassia's voice was a soft murmur beside him. She had swapped her enigmatic black robes for a stylish, modern peacoat and trousers, blending into the London crowds with an ease that suggested she had done is 1,000 times in 1,000 different cities. You are not just feeling the world around you anymore. You are reading it. It's loud, Percy admitted, focusing his senses, pushing the cacophon. Why of spectral whispers to the background? It is a library. Learn to read the spines of the books you need and ignore the rest, she advised. You will need that skill tonight. We are going to the Tower of London. Percy raised an eyebrow. To see the crown jewels. Indirectly, Kasha said, a rare hint of amusement in her voice. The tower was not built where it is by accident. It sits atop a convergence of ley lines. A place the ancient Britons called the Draconis Font, the Dragon's Well. A natural nexus of telluric energy. It is the perfect place to use the Void Shard to find its master. And tonight, a secretive little club of aristocrats and occultists who call themselves the Cadmus Conclave is hosting a gala within its walls. They believe they are the secret guardians of Britain's power. In reality, they are little more than glorified librarians, dusting off books they don't have the power to read. But their party will provide the perfect cover for us to access the lower levels. The preparation was swift and jarringly mundane. Using the seemingly bottomless funds Kasha had provided, they acquired what was needed. For Percy, it was a perfectly tailored tuxedo in a shade of midnight blue so dark it was almost black. Standing in front of the mirror in their temporary suite, he barely recognized the man staring back. The last traces of the awkward teenager from Long Island had been sandblasted away, replaced by someone with an unsettling stillness in his eyes. His power was no longer an ill-fitting coat. It was a part of him, and it had changed the very way he held himself. He looked less like a guest and more like someone who could buy the building and have it torn down on a whim. Remember, Kasha instructed, adjusting his tie with an impersonal precision. Your power is not a sword here. It is an atmosphere. Project what you wish them to see. To a security guard, You are a guest whose name he has forgotten, but who is too important to question. To a rival businessman, you are a threat. To an ambitious lord, you are an opportunity. You are a dragon among mortals. Let them see only the shimmering scales, not the fire within, unless it is to your advantage. She tapped the center of his chest. Fold your power in, mask it, let it simmer, but do not let it boil. He did as she said, focusing inward, pulling the vast, humming reservoir of platinum energy into a tight, dense core. The feeling of being a miniature sun diminished, replaced by the subtle, magnetic hum of a high-voltage transformer. Palpable, but contained, the Tower of London at night was a breathtaking fortress of floodlit stone and deep, imposing shadows. The usual throngs of tourists were gone, replaced by a fleet of gleaming luxury cars and men in dark suits with earpieces. Percy could feel the layers of security, both mortal and something more. The beefeaters standing guard at the bloody tower were not just ceremonial. He could sense the ancient oaths that bound their bloodlines to this place, a quiet, stubborn strength woven into their very being. They were guardians of something they only partially understood. Inside the White Tower, the gala was in full swing. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, the murmur of powerful conversations, and the clinking of champagne flutes. Percy's senses immediately went to work, sifting through the noise. He felt the threads of ambition, conspiracy, and desire that connected the people in the room. It was a different kind of battlefield, one fought with whispers and glances instead of blades. And at its center, holding court like a spider in the middle of a web, was a man who radiated an aura of cold, absolute control. He was older, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from marble. His suit was impeccable, but it was his eyes that held Percy's attention. They were a pale, piercing blue, and they held the chilling certainty of a man who had never once in his life been told, no. Lord Alistair Finch. Cassia's voice was a whisper in his ear. Current head of the Cadmus Conclave. His family has been collecting pre-Olympian lore and artifacts for 30 generations. He sees himself as a shepherd, protecting humanity from the wolves. And I'm a wolf, Percy murmured back. To him, you are something far worse, Kasha replied. You are a dragon, an apex predator that has wandered into his carefully curated sheep pasture. Be careful, his intellect is as sharp as any celestial bronze blade. As if sensing their attention, Finch's pale blue eyes swept across the room and locked directly onto Percy's. There was no surprise, just a flicker of cold, analytical interest. He excused himself from his conversation and began to move towards them, his progress through tea. He crowed as effortless as a shark parting a school of fish. I don't believe we've been introduced, Finch said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. He was looking at Percy, having already dismissed Kasha as a subordinate. Alistair Finch. I pride myself on knowing everyone of consequence who walks these halls. Your name seems to have escaped me. Percy met his gaze, letting a fraction of his contained power bleed into his presence, just enough to make the air around them feel a few degrees heavier. My name is Percy, and I'm new money, he said, a faint, challenging smile on his lips. Finch's eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the subtle power play. Indeed, there is a great deal of that in the world today. But power is not the same as pedigree, wouldn't you agree? Some roots run deeper than others. He gestured vaguely at the ancient stone walls around them. This tower, this nation, was built on a foundation of history, of understanding one's place in the great tapestry. Abe, the tapestry is due for a new thread, Percy countered, his tone light, conversational. Or maybe the old threads are starting to unravel. Fossils are beautiful, Lord Finch, but they're a poor defense against a living predator. A flash of something, anger, or perhaps respect, glinted in Finch's eyes. He had expected a brutish upstart. He had not expected this calm, articulate challenge. This was not a mindless beast. This was a rival intelligence. Their conversation continued, a verbal fencing match of veiled threats and probing questions. Finch was trying to catalog him, to place him within his vast mental library of myth and monster. Percy, in turn, was feeding him just enough information to make him feel confident, while simultaneously establishing himself as something new, Summit. Unpredictable that Finch couldn't possibly have a contingency for. He felt a subtle mental nudge from Kasha. It was time. While Percy held the spider's attention, the chronicler was meant to be disabling the wards. But something was wrong. He could feel Cassia's frustration, a faint spike of alarm. The wards were more complex than she had anticipated. She couldn't bypass them without a significant distraction. Percy scanned the room, his mind working with draconic speed. A brawl was too crude. He needed to create chaos, but chaos with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. His eyes fell on a florid, portly man with a greedy aura. Deep in conversation with Finch's closest associates, Percy's senses picked up the man's name from the whispers around him. Marcus Sterling, a rival whose shipping empire Finch was slowly trying to absorb. Sterling was a man consumed by ambition and paranoia. Perfect. Excusing himself from Finch with a polite nod, Percy ambled past Sterling's group. As he did, he focused a sliver of his draconic aura, not of power, but of pure, predatory intent and suspicion, and projected it directly into Sterling's mind. It was like pouring a drop of gasoline onto a smoldering coal. Simultaneously, he murmured, just loud enough for Sterling to hear, he wouldn't dare. Not right under their noses. It was all it took. Sterling's paranoia, amplified by the unnatural psychic push, erupted. His face went purple. What was that? What did you say? He demanded of Percy. Before Percy could answer, Sterling turned on Finch's men. I knew it. The Black Sea contracts. You're colluding to force me out. Finch put you up to this. The accusation, loud and vulgar, cut through the refined atmosphere of the gala. Finch's head snapped around, his face a mask of cold fury at this public breach of decorum. As the conclave's leadership moved to contain the enraged Sterling, their attention was completely diverted. The web was in disarray. That was the only opening Percy needed. He melted into the crowd and followed the faint, shimmering trail of energy Kasha had left for him, a path visible only to his senses. It led him through a service door, down a winding stone staircase, and into the cold, silent depths beneath the tower. He found Kasha standing before a heavy, iron-banded oak door covered in glowing, silvery runes. His family has layered these wards for centuries, she said, her voice tight with frustration. They're tied to his bloodline. I can't bypass them without bringing the whole tower's security down on us. Percy looked at the door. He didn't see runes or magic. He saw a lock, and he held the key. He placed his palm flat against the ancient wood. He didn't push, didn't channel a blast of power. He simply let the pure, unfiltered essence of Bahamut, the energy of life, order, and creation, flow from his hand. The silver runes flared violently, then fizzled and died, like stars winking out. The ancient locking mechanism groaned, and the heavy door swung inward. Kasha stared, her hidden face a mask of what might have been awe. You didn't break them. You reasoned with them. You presented a higher authority. The room beyond was circular, and the air was humming with a power so ancient it made the Olympians feel like newborns. In the center of the floor was a simple stone well, about 5 feet across. It was filled not with water, but with a swirling, pearlescent mist that seemed to breathe with a slow, steady rhythm. The Draconis font. Now, Kasha urged, her voice tense. Before they realize what's happened. Percy took out the void shard. The moment it entered the room, the beautiful mist in the well recoiled, hissing like steam on ice. He knelt at the edge of the font, took a deep breath, and plunged the shard of Absol Ute darkness into the heart of the life-giving nexus. Then, he placed his hands on either side of the well and pushed his own energy in after it, a torrent of platinum light. It was like setting off a depth charge in the planet's soul. The font erupted in a column of swirling light and shadow. His mind was ripped from his body and thrown across the globe. He felt the shard's connection to its master flare to life. A screaming black thread in the tapestry of the world. He saw visions. A jagged island of black rock, wreathed in a perpetual storm. Waves of dark water crashing against volcanic shores. And in a cavern at the island's heart, a throne of obsidian, upon which sat a figure that was both man and shadow. He felt an intellect, ancient and vast and colder than the void between galaxies, turn its attention towards him. A name vibrated through his very essence, a psychic shockwave, Astarion. The connection suddenly became a two-way street. He felt Astarion's mind push back, a surge of malevolent power that threatened to overwhelm him. So, the little whelp has learned a new trick, a thought echoed in his skull, dripping with a contempt that was billions of years old. You have found my home. Come, then. Come and be unmade. Then, the alarms started blaring. Not just bells and sirens, but a deep, resonant klaxon that was purely mystical. The entire tower shuddered. The connection shattered. Percy was back in his own body, kneeling before the now dimly glowing font, gasping for breath. We have to go, Kasha said, already pulling him to his feet. Now, they didn't go back the way they came. Kasha led him through a series of ever smaller tunnels, the escape route she had prepared. Behind them, he could hear the thunder of heavy footsteps and Finch's enraged, bellowing orders. They were not just security guards. Percy could feel the cold hum of enchanted artifacts and the grim determination of men trained to hunt things like him. They burst out from a grate into the cool night air of the moat, emerging into the shadows as Finch's forces sealed the tower from within. Percy looked back at the ancient fortress, now a hornet's nest he had kicked over. He had a name, Astarion. He had a location, or at least a clue. But he had made a powerful new enemy in Lord Finch. And far worse, his true adversary now knew he was coming. Later, in a sterile, anonymous safe house in Kensington, the adrenaline finally began to fade. Percy stared out the window at the endless river of headlights, the void shard now inert and cold in his pocket. Astarion, Kasha said, her voice thoughtful. It is an old name. In the ancient myths, it was the true name of the Minotaur. A beast in a labyrinth. Fitting. He knows I saw him, Percy said, the memory of that cold, cosmic intellect making his skin crawl. He's waiting for me. Yes, Kasha agreed. The hunt has become a race. He will expect you. We must find a way to arrive on his shores as something other than what he expects. Percy clenched his fist. The game of cat and mouse was over. The board was set. He was no longer reacting. He had a target. The dragon was finally going to war. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Gilded Cage and the Forging of a Weapon. The silence of the safe house in Kensington was more menacing than the alarms at the tower. It was the silence of a cage, a temporary pause in a hunt that had escalated beyond all imagining. Percy stood at the window, watching the ceaseless flow of London traffic, but his senses were cast much wider. He could feel the city's new awareness of him. It wasn't just the mortal authorities, who were being fed sanitized stories of a gas main explosion at the tower. It was something else. A network of watchers, their gazes like pinpricks on his new, sensitive skin. They were Finch's people, the Cadmus conclave. They weren't clumsy. There were no obvious tails, no men in black cars parked across the street. It was a subtle, pervasive web of influence. A doorman whose gaze lingered a second too long. A street artist whose charcoal sketches seemed to follow his movements. A stray piece of gossip about a mysterious American billionaire that would suddenly surface in a cafe he'd just left. It was a hunt conducted with whispers and information, and it was suffocating. He's boxing us in, Percy said, turning from the window. Kasha was seated at a small table, a laptop open before her. Though her attention was focused inward, her senses likely spread just as thin as his. He's using his network to shrink our world. Sooner or later, he'll have us cornered. Lord Finch is a master of the board, Kasha agreed, her voice calm. He hunts with policy and wealth, not with spears. But he is a mortal playing a game of gods. His reach is wide, but it is not deep. He is a problem, but he is not the war. Astarion is the war, Percy finished for her. And he's waiting for me. I walked into his mind. He knows what I am, what I can do. A direct assault is what he wants. Precisely, Kasha affirmed, closing the laptop. He will be prepared for a dragon. He will have wards designed to counter your energy, guardians forged from the void to drain your strength. To go to him as you are now would be to throw a magnificent, beautiful bonfire into the ocean. The display would be spectacular, but the fire would be extinguished all the same. So what's the alternative? Percy asked, the frustration a tight coil in his gut. I can't fight him from here. You are thinking like a demigod, a wielder of power. You must learn to think like a creator, Kasha said, standing and walking towards him. Your power is the essence of Bahamut, creation, order, life. Astarion's is that of Tiamat, entropy, chaos, the void. When two fundamental forces meet, the one with the greater focus prevails. Raw energy is not enough. You need to focus your very nature into a singular point. You need a weapon that is not just a tool you carry, but an extension of your soul. Percy thought of Riptide, the familiar weight of the pen in his pocket, a sword that was a gift from his father. It felt like a lifetime ago. That was a demigod's weapon. He was not a demigod. Where do we find a forge that can handle something like that? Percy asked. Hephaestus isn't exactly on my friends list right now. The Olympian forges are glorified blacksmith shops compared to what you need. Kasha said dismissively. They work with divine metals. You need a place that can work with divine concepts. There are a few beings, older than the pantheons, who served the act of creation itself. Artificers. We are going to see one. And how do we get there while Finch's all-seeing eye is on us? A flicker of a smile in Cassia's voice. We will hide in the one place a man like Finch would never expect a creature of your power to go. We will hide in plain sight, surrounded by the very people who would pay a king's ransom for a single scale from your hide. She turned the laptop around. On the screen was the glossy homepage for an event in Monaco. The Elysian auction, the gilded script read. A connoisseur's evening of the unique and the unattainable. The ages that scrolled past were of priceless artifacts. A jewel-encrusted Fabergé egg that was rumored to trap dreams, a samurai sword said to have been cooled in the blood of an oni, a faded scroll that was supposedly a lost gospel. The supernatural world has its own 1%, Kasha explained. Vampire lords from the old world, ancient Phi nobility, jinn of immense wealth, and mortals like Phi. NCH who have clawed their way into the inner circle. They trade in power, in artifacts, in secrets. The Elysian auction is their marketplace. It is neutral ground, enforced by contracts so ancient and binding that not even Zeus would dare to violate them. To start a conflict there would be to invite erasure from reality itself. So we're going shopping, Percy deadpanned. We are going to a doorway, Kasha corrected. The Artificer's Forge exists in a folded space, a reality of its own. The doorways to it are rare, and always hidden. One of them is the auction block at the Elysian. It can only be opened with the right key. And unfortunately for us, Lord Finch is a valued and frequent client of the auction. He will have people there. Monaco was an assault of opulence. The air itself seemed to shimmer with wealth. As Percy stepped out of the black car in front of the Monte Carlo casino, where the auction was being held, he folded his power in so tightly it was a singularity in his chest. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit, projecting an aura of quiet, untouchable wealth. He was no longer just Percy. He was, according to the flawless documentation Kasha had procured, Theseus Kane. A reclusive heir to a shipping fortune who had a penchant for collecting the esoteric. The inside of the casino's private auction hall was a gilded cage teeming with predators. Percy's draconic senses were a blessing and a curse. He could see them all for what they were beneath their human glamour. The woman with eyes like ancient ice was a Phi noble, her power thrumming with the cold, alien logic of her realm. The man with the too sharp smile and the predatory stillness was a vampire, the scent of dried blood and old stone clinging to his aura. A group of men in fine silk suits emanated a heat that was not human, jinn. Their power smelling of spice and ozone. It was a room full of sharks, and Percy had just been thrown in the water. And then he saw them. 3 individuals standing near the back, separate from the mingling crowd. They wore the same simple, impeccably tailored black suits as the security, but they moved with a discipline and awareness that was levels above. He could sense the cold iron woven into the threads of their clothes, the faint hum of contained energy from the devices on their belts. These were Finch's wardens. The one in the lead, a woman with cropped, severe black hair and a scar that cut through one eyebrow, met his gaze across the room. Her eyes were not filled with malice or curiosity, but with the flat, emotionless appraisal of a hunter sizing up its quarry. He could feel the unique power signature of the artifact she carried, a small, obsidian disc on her belt that seemed to actively dampen the energy around it. It was a localized dead zone, a weapon designed specifically to nullify a being like him. Warden Argent, Kasha murmured, never taking her eyes off the auction catalog she was pretending to read. Finch's finest, fanatically loyal. The artifact she carries is a null stone. Get too close, and it will sever your connection to your power. It feels like having your soul ripped out through your throat. Avoid her at all costs. The auction began. The items were ludicrous, the bidding astronomical. A cursed Egyptian amulet, a grimoire bound in dragon skin. Percy felt a visceral, angry pang at that one. He and Kasha made no bids, simply observed, playing the part of discerning collectors. All the while, he could feel Warden Argent's eyes on him. It was a constant, unnerving pressure. She knew who he was. She was just waiting for the rules of this neutral ground to bend enough for her to act. The final item was brought to the stage. It was called the Heart of the Mountain, a raw, uncut diamond the size of a human fist that pulsed with a soft, internal light. It was a magnificent decoy, drawing the avarice and attention of everyone in the room. The gateway is the auction block itself, Kasha whispered, her voice tight. It is keyed to the final gavel strike. We need to be standing on that dais when the auction for the heart ends. The winning bid is not a number. It is a phrase, a password in the old tongue. Getting to the stage was impossible. Warden Argent and her two subordinates had moved, forming a subtle, perfect triangle that boxed Percy in. Any move he made towards the stage would be intercepted. The bidding for the heart of the mountain began, the numbers climbing into the tens of millions. The auctioneer's voice was a hypnotic chant. Percy's mind raced. He couldn't fight them. The null stone was too much of a risk. He had to outthink them. He had to use the gilded cage to his advantage. The djinn, Percy whispered to Kasha. Third row. They haven't bid on anything. They're not here for artifacts. They're here for status. Their pride is their weakness, Kasha agreed, understanding immediately. Percy focused. He looked at the lead djinn, a powerful Afridi with an aura of shimmering heat and arrogance. Percy didn't project power or aggression. He projected a subtle, targeted thought, not in words, but in pure concept, mockery. He made the djinn feel that Warden Gent and her human faction were looking at him with contempt, that they saw him as a lesser being, all smoke and no fire, a genie out of his bottle. The djinn's eyes narrowed. His pride, fanned by Percy's psychic manipulation, began to smolder. Next, Percy looked at Warden Argent. He didn't try to affect her mind directly, it would be too well shielded. Instead, he subtly flared his draconic aura, just for a microsecond, in the direction of the djinn. To Argent's finely honed senses, it would look as though he were trying to magically influence the Afridi. It was a masterful piece of misdirection. Argent saw what she expected to see, the monster trying to use its magic. Her eyes narrowed. She and her team shifted their stance, preparing to move, anticipating Percy would make a magical induced scene using the djinn as a proxy. The bidding for the diamond reached its peak. Sold. The auctioneer cried, his gavel raised. This was it. At that moment, Percy acted. But he didn't move towards the stage. He strode directly towards the djinn. The Afridi, already simmering with perceived insults, saw the target of his ire approaching. You have something to say, human. He growled, his voice a low rumble of desert wind. Warden Argent and her team converged, their hands going to their belts, ready to activate their containment gear. They thought they had him. They were moving to intercept him at the djinn's table, a pincer movement to trap him between a furious magical being and their own nullifying technology. They had fallen for the feint. Only this, Percy said to the djinn, his voice clear and calm. And then he said something in the old tongue, the language of creation itself. It wasn't the password for the gateway. It was an insult so profound, so ancient and specific to the djinn's fire clan, that it was tantamount to a declaration of war. The Afridi exploded in a controlled, contained vortex of shimmering heat and rage. He didn't attack Percy. His pride demanded he answer the true source of the insult, the humans who had, in his manipulated mind, been mocking him all night. He turned on Argent's position. The wardens were caught completely off guard. Their focus was on Percy. They were not prepared for a direct confrontation with an enraged Afridi prince on neutral ground. They were forced to backpedal, to raise their defenses, creating a momentary, chaotic hole in their perfect containment net. And in that single moment of chaos, while all eyes were on the standoff between the wardens and the djinn, Kasha moved. She was a ghost, a shadow, that flowed through the distracted crowd, and Percy was right behind her. They didn't run. They walked, with purpose and calm, directly to the now vacant stage, stepping onto the auction block just as the auctioneer, oblivious, brought his gavel down with a resounding crack. Percy uttered the true password, a single word that meant, unfold. The world dissolved. The gilded auction hall, the enraged djinn, the stunned face of Warden Argent, it all vanished, not in a flash of light, but as if it had been a painting and the canvas had just been wiped clean. He was standing on a floor of polished obsidian that reflected a sky filled with swirling, newborn galaxies. The air hummed with a music that was also mathematics. Before him was a forge, but it was not made of stone and fire. It was a controlled point of creation. A miniature star held in a cage of impossible geometry. A figure turned to face them. It had a humanoid shape, but it was composed of pure, liquid starlight, its voice sound of cooling metal and singing nebulae. You were late, chronicler, the celestial artificer chimed. And you have brought a new song to my forge. He needs a vessel for his song, Kasha said. Her voice filled with a reverence Percy had never heard before. Percy stepped forward. He knew what he had to do. He reached into his own chest, not with his physical hand, but with his will. He grasped the dense, white-hot core of his draconic power and pulled. The pain was immense, a feeling of having his soul torn in two, but he did not falter. He drew out a shimmering, molten sphere of pure platinum energy. His own life force given form. It pulsed in his hands, a star of his own making. He held it out to the artificer. Can you work with this? The being of starlight reached out a shimmering hand. It has been millennia since I have worked with a material so pure, the artificer sang, its voice filled with something akin to joy. This will not be a weapon. It will be a symphony. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Song of the Soul Forge. The world of the celestial artificer was not a place of fire and steel, but of sound and light. The forge was a captured star, its energies kontai. Ned not by metal but by humming chords of geometry. The air itself was a symphony of creation, and the artificer, a being of woven starlight, was its conductor. It took the molten sphere of Percy's soul stuff, the raw, incandescent piece of his own being, and held it aloft. The sphere pulsed in time with Percy's own frantic heartbeat, a tangible extension of his life force, and the feeling of its absence was a cold, terrifying void in the center of his chest. A song must have a purpose, the artificer chimed, its voice 1,000 harmonious tones at once. Its starlight hands did not hammer or shape the sphere. They hovered over it, plucking at strands of light, weaving them like a loom. With each note of its cosmic song, Percy was pulled into a vision, forced to confront the core of his own nature. What is your purpose, Dragon Son? Are you a shield? He was standing on the crest of Half-Blood Hill, a boy again, facing the charging Minotaur. He saw his own fear, his raw, untamed power. He felt the satisfying crunch of the beast's horn as he drove it into its side. It was a victory, but the artificer's question echoed in the memory. He had defended himself, yes, but the act was one of violence, of ending a life. The shield was incidental. The purpose had been the kill. No, Percy thought, the answer a vibration in the fabric of the forge. Are you a sword? The artificer's song continued, the notes shifting to a minor key. He was in the heart of Mount St. Helens, facing a legion of telekines. He felt the raw, untamed power of the sea god within him, a force of destruction he barely understood. He remembered the feeling of pulling all that power inward, the heat, the pressure, and then unleashing it in a cataclysmic explosion that blew the top off the mountain. He had been a weapon, a blade of divine rage that had cut down his enemies, but it had almost consumed him. It was a blind, indiscriminate force. That is not my true nature, Percy answered, the memory tasting of ash and self-loathing. The song shifted again, becoming complex, labyrinthine. Are you a key? He stood before the Titan Atlas, the weight of the sky crushing every bone, every nerve in his body. He wasn't fighting. He was enduring. He was holding the world together not through strength, but through sheer, stubborn will. In that moment, he had been the lock, the key, and the door all at once. The single point preventing total collapse. And then, he was in Tartarus with Annabeth, not as a conqueror or a warrior, but as a survivor. They were two souls against an entire universe of despair, and their only weapon was their refusal to let go of each other. They navigated the horrors not with a blade, but with trust. This felt closer. This was the core of it. Not the power to destroy, but the will to endure. Not the strength to kill, but the resolve to protect what mattered. The essence of Bahamut wasn't just life, it was the ordered, structured systems that allowed life to flourish. It was the law of gravity that held stars in their orbits, the strength of a cell wall, the fierce, unwavering loyalty that bound two people together in the dark. I am not a thing, Percy projected. His voice now a chord in the artificer's symphony. A sword is for severing. A shield is for deflecting. A key is for opening. They are all single purpose. I am not. I must be all of them. And none of them. I am the will that decides what is needed. The artificer seemed to nod, a slow cascade of starlight. A wise answer. A difficult song to sing. You do not wish for an object. You wish for a focus. For potential, given form. The sphere of Percy's essence flared, the light intensifying until it was impossible to look at. The artificer's song reached a crescendo, a single, perf. ECT note that was the sound of a star being born. The light collapsed inward, folding into itself again and again until all that was left was a single, elegant object that floated down into Percy's waiting hands. It wasn't a sword or a shield. It was a bracer, crafted from a platinum metal that seemed to shift and flow like liquid moonlight. It was unadorned, its surface smooth and warm to the touch. As he clasped it around his right forearm, it resized itself, fitting him as if it had been forged there. The cold void in his chest was not filled, but the edges of it were, soothed. The bracer was not a replacement for the power he'd given up, but a lens for what remained. He felt weaker, his total energy reserves diminished, but his control was absolute, his focus as sharp as a diamond needle. It felt like a part of him had come home. It is a conceptual focus, the artificer explained as the last notes of its song faded. It will not make you more powerful. It will make you more precise. Shape your will, and it shall give it form. But be warned, the form is a reflection of the will. A muddled intent will create a flawed tool. Thank you, Percy said, the words feeling inadequate. The song is sung, the artificer replied. A shimmering tear in the fabric of the obsidian floor appeared before them. Your doorway awaits, but the threads of fate are tangled. The world you left is not the one to which you will return. Percy and Kasha stepped through the tear and into chaos. They were not in the gilded hull in Monaco. They were in the roaring, vibrating darkness of a tunnel. The air tasting of ozone and pressure. Two steel rails gleamed under a series of harsh emergency lights, stretching into infinity in both directions. Percy could feel the powerful magnetic field T-hat hummed from the walls and the distant, rapidly approaching vibration of a train. A maglev, moving at incredible speed. The gateway was tampered with, Kasha said, her voice tight, all professional calm. Finch's people. They tried to seize control of the portal. It must have destabilized. We've been shunted sideways in space and time. It was worse than that. Percy could feel them. A series of devices, clamped to the tunnel walls at regular intervals. Null stones. But these were larger, weaponized, projecting a cascading field that was systematically strangling his power at the source. The air was thick with an energy that felt like anti-magic, and the connection to his draconic core was flickering like a dying candle. The cold void in his chest began to ache, amplified by the external suppression field. This was Finch's answer to their escape. It was brilliant, a technological cage designed to neutralize a god. A voice, amplified and distorted by a comm system, echoed through the tunnel. Nowhere to run, anomaly. No magic to save you. Just a boy in a tunnel and a very fast train. High-intensity spotlights blazed to life, pinning them in their glare. Magnetically clamped to the walls and ceiling of the tunnel were a dozen figures in sleek, black-armored exoskeletons. And leading them, standing upside down on the curved ceiling as casually as if she were in a parade ground, was Warden Argent. Her face was grim, her scar a livid slash under the harsh lights. Lord Finch is a man who learns from his mistakes, Argent's voice boomed. He sends his regards, and his regrets that it had to end this way. The train's vibration was a deafening roar now, its headlight a rapidly growing star that would annihilate them in seconds. The wardens weren't moving to attack. They didn't need to. The tunnel, the null field, and the train were the perfect execution chamber. Panic was a cold, useless thing. Percy shoved it aside. The artificer's words echoed in his mind. Shape your will, and it shall give it form. He was weak, his power almost completely suppressed. He couldn't unleash a wave of force. The null field would swallow it. He had to be precise. He raised his arm, the new bracer gleaming. He ignored the wardens, ignored the crushing pressure of the null field. He focused on the two steel rails in front of him. They were part of the world, and his power was the power of creation. Of shaping what already existed. The bracer was his focus. He pushed a single, clear command through it, a sliver of will that bypassed the suffocating field. His intent. Rise. The steel rails 50 yards ahead of them began to glow with a soft, platinum light. They groaned, the sound of tortured metal screaming in protest, and then they bent. They twisted upwards, warping into a smooth, steep ramp that soared towards the tunnel ceiling. The maglev train, a 400-ton bullet train moving at nearly 400 miles per hour, hit the ramp. There was a cataclysmic shriek of metal, and then, for a surreal moment, the entire train was airborne. It flew over Percy and Cassia's heads, a testament to momentum and redirected physics, before crashing back down onto the rails on the other side with an earth-shaking impact that sent a shower of sparks and shattered components flying through the tunnel. It careened violently down the track and out of sight, a wounded beast roaring into the darkness. The wardens on the wall were frozen for a split second, their perfect plan shattered by an act of casual reality warping they could never have anticipated. That second was all Percy needed. The null field was still active, still crushing him, but the bracer on his arm was a bulwark, protecting the last, essential flicker of his connection to his own soul. He focused again, his will shaping a new form. A blade extended from the bracer's edge. It wasn't a sword of light or fire. It was a thin, almost invisible sliver of hard-edged reality, less than 2 feet long. That seemed to vibrate at a frequency that made the air around it shimmer. A monomolecular edge of pure will. He lunged, not at the wardens, but at the wall beside them. He was a blur of motion. His weakened state compensated for by the perfect efficiency the bracer afforded him. He didn't need to be strong, he just needed to be precise. He slashed upwards. The blade passed through the magnetic clamp holding the nearest warden to the wall as if it wasn't there. There was no spark, no clang. The device was simply severed. The warden let out a yell of surprise as he tumbled from the wall. Saved from a fatal fall only by a desperate grab for a nearby conduit. Percy moved like a phantom, a whirlwind of precise, targeted destruction. He wasn't killing them. He was disarming them, dismantling their trap one piece at a time. He severed another clamp, then another, his blade weaving a pattern of chaos through their ordered formation. Warden Argent recovered first. Contain him, she roared, detaching from the ceiling. Small thrusters on her suit fired, allowing her to maneuver in the tight confines of the tunnel. She flew directly at Percy, her personal null stone flaring to maximum intensity. The pressure was unbearable. It felt like a black hole had opened in his chest. His vision swam, and the blade extending from his bracer flickered, threatening to dissolve. He was on his knees, the sheer, soul-crushing force of the null field at point-blank range threatening to unmake him. Argent landed in front of him, her armored boots striking the ground with a heavy thud. She raised a weapon. A complex rifle that hummed with contained energy. It's over, anomaly. Your power is gone. You're wrong. Percy gritted out, forcing his head up. It's just quiet. He looked past her, at the curved ceiling of the tunnel directly above them. He couldn't fight her null field head on. So he wouldn't. He poured the last dregs of his focused will into his blade. He didn't slash. He pointed the tip at the ceiling and pulsed a single, silent command. A concept. Unmake. There was no explosion, no sound at all. A perfect, 10-foot diameter circle of the reinforced concrete and rock above them simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. And the cold, churning waters of the English Channel, held back for a century by engineering and steel, came crashing down. A torrent of black, freezing seawater slammed into the tunnel, a vertical waterfall of immense power. It hit Argent squarely, throwing her back, her high-tech suit sparking as the saltwater found its way into her systems. The deluge shorted out the null stone generators on the walls, and Percy felt the crushing pressure on his soul vanish, replaced by the exhilarating, life-giving rush of his own returning power. The tunnel was now a maelstrom of rushing water and chaos. Kasha was suddenly at his side. "This is our exit," she yelled over the roar. Percy didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand and let his draconic power, now unleashed, surge through him. He didn't fight the water. He commanded it. The torrent became their elevator, a column of controlled, pressurized water that shot them upwards. Through the hole in the tunnel roof, and into the cold, dark expanse of the sea. They surfaced in the middle of a choppy, storm-tossed sea, miles from any visible shore. The sky was the bruised purple of a coming dawn. Below them, the breach in the channel was causing a massive, swirling vortex as the sea poured into the man-made passage. They were alive. They were free. Percy looked at the bracer on his arm. It was no longer glowing, just a simple, elegant band of platinum against his skin, humming with a quiet, steady power that was in perfect sync with his own heartbeat. He had his weapon. Kasha, treading water beside him, looked back at the swirling chaos of their escape route. Finch will declare a private war now. He will not be subtle anymore. Let him, Percy said, his voice hard, devoid of the doubt that had plagued him for so long. He looked east, towards the rising sun, towards the part of the world where a black island waited under a perpetual storm. Finch is a problem for another day. He's been a distraction, and I'm done being distracted. The choice was made. The weapon was forged. The running was over. The dragon was no longer hiding. He was going hunting. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Dragon's Wake. The surface of the English Channel was a churning chaos of black water and gray, pre-dawn light. The vortex created by the breach in the channel was a hungry maw, pulling debris and seawater into the depths with a constant, thunderous roar. For a human, to be here would be a death sentence, a swift descent into the crushing, freezing dark. For Percy, it was a homecoming. He felt the water not as a threat, but as an extension of his own domain. It was a wild, untamed part of his kingdom, and it was in turmoil. The old Percy, the son of Poseidon, would have felt the sea god's power as a comforting warmth, a familiar embrace. The new Percy felt something different. He felt the raw, fundamental power of the ocean, its weight, its pressure, its ancient, abiotic hunger, and he recognized it as a lesser version of himself. He was the dragon. This was merely his horde. He will have air and sea patrols searching within the hour, Kasha said. Her voice unnervingly calm as she trod water beside him. The salt and cold seemed not to affect her. The destruction of a major piece of infrastructure will be an international incident. Finch will leverage that. He will paint us as terrorists. Let him, Percy said. He closed his eyes, ignoring the storm, the vortex, the approaching dawn. He reached out, not with the senses of a demigod who could speak to fish, but with the innate authority of his own being. He felt the currents, the intricate web of energy that flowed through the planet's oceans. He found the powerful, deep-run Ning current that swept south from the Arctic, a cold, fast-moving river within the sea. It was miles away and thousands of feet down. He focused his will, using the bracer on his arm not to create, but to command. He didn't ask the current to change course. He told it to. He pulled on a thread of its immense kinetic energy, bending it to his will. The sea around them began to change. The chaotic chop smoothed out. A section of water, 100 feet in diameter, began to rise, lifting them gently out of the waves. It formed a smooth, concave dish of solid-looking water, a living boat that moved with impossible grace. Deeper down, the redirected current formed a powerful, silent jet stream, propelling their strange vessel forward at a speed that would rival a speedboat. The roar of the vortex faded behind them as they sliced through the waves, leaving a wake of unnaturally calm water. Kasha stood on the aqueous deck, her arms crossed. If she was surprised, she gave no sign. Efficient, she noted. You command the system itself, not just the substance. The artificer said I needed to be more precise, Percy replied, his eyes fixed on the southern horizon. Brute force is what Asterion is expecting. They traveled in silence for a while, the only sounds the hiss of their vessel cutting through the water and the cry of a distant gull. The sun rose, a pale, watery disk that did little to warm the air. The sheer scale of what lay before him was beginning to settle in. He was going to a place that likely didn't exist on any map to fight a being that predated gods, while being hunted by a secret society with limitless resources. The old Percy would have been terrified, making jokes to cover his fear. The new Percy felt only a cold, clear sense of purpose. Tell me about the chroniclers, he said, breaking the silence. You say you exist to maintain the balance. What does that mean? Are there more of you? Kasha turned her hooded head towards him. There are. A few. We are not a race or a species. We are a function. When the first creation occurred, the twin forces of Bahamut and Tiamat came into being. With them, a third principle was born, the observer. The record. That is us. We do not have power in the way you or Astarion do. We cannot create or unmake. We can only see the patterns, read the threads, and occasionally, when the entire tapestry is at risk of being unraveled, we are permitted to nudge a thread back into place. You're nudging me, Percy stated. You are the most significant nudge in millennia, she confirmed. The vessels of the twin dragons are not born. They are awakened. It happens only when the balance has shifted so far to one side that a counterweight is a cosmic necessity. The last vessel of Bahamut rose to counter the Saint vessel of Tiamat during the age of the dinosaurs. Their final battle is what humanity now refers to as the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event. A meteor was a much tidier explanation for the mortals to discover. Percy digested that. The sheer, terrifying scale of his new reality was still expanding. So this has all happened before. In a way, the song changes, but the symphony remains the same, Kasha said. For the last 65 million years, the power of Tiamat has been dominant but dormant. A slow, creeping entropy. A universe winding down. Astarion's awakening signals a shift from that quiet decay to active, aggressive consumption. He doesn't want the universe to fade to black. He wants to tear it down, star by star, and return it to the perfect, absolute silence of the void. And I'm supposed to stop him. You are supposed to be his equal and opposite, she corrected. The outcome of your conflict is not pre-written. I am here to ensure you face him with a complete understanding of your own nature. The rest is up to you. Her words were clarifying, but not comforting. He wasn't a hero chosen by prophecy. He was a biological, cosmic failsafe. A walking, talkie, reset button for a reality on the brink of collapse. In a penthouse office overlooking the steel and glass canyons of Canary Wharf, the morning light did nothing to dispel the chilling atmosphere. Lord Alistair Finch stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, a tablet in his hand displaying the chaotic initial reports from the Eurotunnel disaster. He was a statue of cold, controlled fury. The door hissed open and Warden Argent entered. Her armor was gone, replaced by a simple black uniform. She was bruised, her face pale with exhaustion and fury, but her back was ramrod straight. She did not offer excuses. She did not apologize. Report, Finch said without turning. He neutralized the null field by breaching the tunnel and flooding it, Argent stated, her voice a clipped, emotionless monotone. He manipulated the rails to disable the train. His weapon, it wasn't energy or matter. It seemed to cut through the concept of the magnetic clamps, not the physical material. Our convention, and esoteric countermeasures are insufficient. He is adapting faster than we can analyze. I am aware, Finch said, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned from the window, his pale blue eyes like chips of ice. I underestimated him. I saw a monster and prepared a cage. I did not realize I was trying to cage a storm. A mistake I will not make again. He gestured to the tablet. The world is in chaos. The markets are panicking. The governments are demanding answers. It is the perfect smokescreen. While they hunt for a phantom terrorist cell, we will hunt our true quarry. My team is ready to redeploy, Argent said. A flicker of eagerness in her flat tone. Your team is a scalpel. We now require a hammer, Finch countered. He walked to his desk, a vast slab of polished obsidian, and pressed a hidden rune on its surface. A section of the wall slid away, revealing a vault. From within, he removed a heavy, ornate wooden box. For generations, the Conclave has collected and contained. We have been guardians, librarians. But our founders were not so passive. They understood that some anomalies cannot be contained. They must be erased. He placed the box on the desk and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, black iron crossbow bolt. It seemed to drink the light from the room, and the air around it was still and dead. Percy would have recognized the feeling instantly. It was the same soul-draining cold of the Void Shard, but weaponized, focused. A splinter from the Void Mother's original throne, salvaged from the Tunguska event in 1908, Finch said, his voice reverent. Tipped with a sliver of solidified anti-life. It does not kill, it unmakes. It will erase him from time, from history, from reality itself. No reincarnation, no underworld, just nothing. Argent stared at the bolt, her professional composure finally cracking to reveal a sliver of awe and fear. Who could possibly wield such a thing? Not who, Finch said, closing the box with a soft, final click. What? We have an asset in our stasis facility beneath the Scottish Highlands. A failsafe from the last great war against the Fae. It is not a warden. It is not even human. It is a hunter, built for a singular purpose, to track and kill beings of immense power. A perfect predator. He looked at Argent, and for the first time, his cold eyes held a sliver of something akin to sympathy. Go, rest. When the time comes, I will unleash the sentry, and this anomaly in our world will be corrected. Permanently. Days passed. Percy and Kasha sped south, unseen and untracked, a ghost ship on a silent sea. He learned to sustain the vessel with a fraction of his will, to feel the health of the ocean, the currents of plankton, the deep, slow thoughts of the whales that sang in the crushing abyss. He was becoming one with the sea in a way his father could never have imagined. He was not its master, he was its consciousness. They were in the mid-Atlantic, somewhere over the deep, silent plains of the Hatteras Abyssal, when he felt it. It was a presence, a mind so vast, so ancient, and so utterly alien that it made the Olympians feel like squabbling children. It was not malevolent, it was territorial. Something immense and primordial had felt his passage through its domain, had sensed the ripple of his draconic power, and was rising from the crushing dark to investigate the presence of a rival. We have company, Kasha said, her hand resting on the hilt of a knife Percy hadn't realized she carried. The sea around their vessel began to churn. The water darkened, and a shape began to resolve itself beneath them, a shape so vast it blotted out the light from the depths. It rose, water cascading from its back in waterfalls the size of rivers. It was a leviathan, a creature from an age before gods or men. Its skin was the color of basalt and patterned with glowing, blue runes of a language that had never been spoken in the sunlit world. Its head, a colossal, armored wedge larger than a battleship, broke the surface, and an eye the size of a bus depot opened, its pupil a swirling galaxy of ancient starlight. It regarded them not as food, but as a curiosity, an infringement. A voice echoed not in their ears, but directly in their minds, a psychic pressure that felt like the weight of the entire ocean. Less than WHO or you, little spark, to travel my roads uninvited. Greater than, I am Percy Jackson, Percy sent back, his own thought a clear, sharp signal. He stood at the edge of their watercraft, his hand resting on the bracer. We mean you no harm. We are just passing through. Less than, passing through, is for plankton and fish, the Leviathan boomed. Less than power does not pass through. It conquers. It claims. Your spark is bright. It feels familiar. Like AAS. Ong I have not heard in a million turnings of the tide. But this is my water. My domain. You will go no further. Greater than. This was a test. A challenge from one apex predator to another. Percy could try to flee. But he knew the creature would be faster. He could try to fight it head-on, but its sheer scale was overwhelming. He would be a gnat against a mountain. He had to use the one thing he had that creature did not. Conceptual precision. I have no desire to claim your domain, Ancient One, Percy projected, his tone respectful but firm. But I have a destination, and you are in my way. Stand aside. Less than bold, for a spark. Greater than the Leviathan rumbled, a sound that vibrated through the water and into Percy's bones. It opened its mouth, a cavern of impossible size, revealing rows of teeth like jagged mountain ranges. A ball of pure, blue energy began to form in the back of its throat, a miniature sun of bioelectric power. Less than let me show you what true power looks like. Greater than. Percy didn't wait for the blast. He raised his arm, his will flowing through the bracer. He didn't create a shield. A shield would shatter. He had to be smarter. He focused on the water directly in front of the creature's mouth, shaping a complex, multi-layered construct with his mind. A lens. He warped the very structure of the water, creating a concave focal point of impossible density. The Leviathan unleashed its beam. A torrent of energy that could have vaporized an aircraft carrier. The beam hit Percy's conceptual lens. Instead of being blocked, it was bent, refocused, and magnified 1,000 times, narrowing into a single needle-thin beam of incandescent blue light. And it shot straight back into the Leviathan's open mouth. The creature's psychic roar was one of pure shock and pain. It recoiled, shaking its massive head, smoke and ozone pouring from its jaws. It had been wounded by its own power. It was furious now. It dove, its immense tail throwing up a wave that would have swamped a freighter, and began to circle them. A living submarine of colossal size. It was preparing for a different kind of attack. "It's going to come up from beneath us," Kasha said, her knuckles white on her knife. "It will swallow us whole." "It can try," Percy said. He knelt, placing his palm flat against the surface of their water vessel. He closed his eyes, his consciousness merging with the sea, his will flowing through the bracer into the deep. He didn't try to stop the Leviathan. He felt its path, its intent. It was a creature of immense power, but that power was woven into the fabric of the ocean. And Percy was the ocean's new architect. He found the threads of the creature's own bioelectric energy field, the very life force that powered its colossal form. He didn't try to sever them. He simply tied them in a knot. A conceptual knot. He wove the creature's own energy field back on itself, tangling its power, its senses, its ability to move. The Leviathan, rocketing up from the abyss to swallow them, suddenly stopped dead. Its colossal body spasmed. Its psychic voice was no longer a proud roar, but a confused, panicked cry. "Less than what is this? I cannot move. I am bound. Greater than, I have bound you with your own strength," Percy projected, his voice now carrying the cold, absolute authority of the dragon. "You are a magnificent, ancient power, and I honor that. But you are of the sea, and the sea now answers to a new authority. I will not kill you. But I will not be stopped. Acknowledge this, and I will release you. Defy me, and you will remain here, a monument to your own pride, until the currents erode you to nothing." There was a long, profound silence, broken only by the sound of the waves. The Leviathan floated, trapped and helpless, its galactic eye blinking in disbelief. It had existed for eons. The undisputed king of this lightless world. And it had been defeated without a single blow being struck. It had been outthought, outmaneuvered, on a level it didn't know existed. Finally, a new thought, quiet and humbled, touched Percy's mind. "Less than, I acknowledge. Greater than." With a mental flick of his will, Percy undid the knot. The Leviathan's body shuddered as its power flooded back into its limbs. It flexed, testing its freedom. It looked at Percy, who still stood on his small, strange boat, and its gaze was no longer challenging. It was filled with a primal, instinctual awe. It slowly, deliberately, bowed its massive head, sinking beneath the waves until only the very top of its armored brow was visible. A gesture of fealty. Then, with a final, quiet rumble of acknowledgement, it sank back into the abyss, leaving the surface of the ocean still and empty. Percy remained kneeling for a moment, the sheer effort of the confrontation washing over him. He had faced a power that could have shattered mountains and had tamed it with a thought. The bracer on his arm hummed with a quiet, satisfied warmth. He stood up and their vessel began to move again, picking up speed, heading towards a sky that was slowly darkening in the distance, even though the sun was still high. A perpetual twilight. "The storm," Kasha said, her voice laced with a new respect. "Asterian's domain. The void energy is so concentrated there it affects the weather, the sea, the very air." Percy looked ahead at the bruised, churning clouds, the flashes of black lightning that produced no thunder. He could feel it now, a vast, oppressive blanket of nothingness that sought to drain his will, to chill his soul. It was the last barrier. He stood at the prow of their craft, a lone figure against the encroaching darkness. He let his own power, the clean, bright, platinum fire of Bahamut, flare around him, creating a bubble of life and order in the growing chaos. The dragon was no longer crossing the sea. He had arrived, and the void itself was recoiling from his light. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Black Shore and the Silent King. The storm had no edge. One moment, they were slicing through the turbulent but living waters of the Atlantic. The next, they were in a different reality. The sea turned black, oily, and unnaturally calm. The sky, a churning vortex of bruised purple and charcoal clouds, was lit by silent, Jagged flashes of black lightning that seemed to drain the light from the world rather than create it. There was no wind, yet the air was a physical weight, a pressure that promised to suffocate the soul. This was Astarion's domain, the active, all-consuming power of the void dragon made manifest. Percy stood at the prow of their aqueous vessel, the concept. UAL focus on his arm glowing with a steady, soft platinum light. He let his own aura of creation and order expand, a bubble of reality pushing back against the oppressive nothingness. The water of their boat, which had been clear and vibrant, now seemed dull, its life-giving energy being constantly leached away. It took a conscious, draining effort to maintain its form and function. "It's a metaphysical cancer," Percy said, his voice a low hum. "It doesn't just destroy, it convinces everything it touches that it was never there to begin with." "This is the nature of the last silence," Kasha affirmed, her posture rigid. Her hand never leaving the hilt of her concealed knife. "It is the final, absolute truth of entropy. All things end. He has simply chosen to be the ending." Ahead, an island resolved itself from the gloom. It was a jagged spike of volcanic rock, blacker than a starless midnight, that clawed at the vortex sky. The rock itself seemed to drink the ambient light, giving it no reflection, no dimension. Twisted, skeletal shapes that might have once been trees stood petrified on its slopes, their branches reaching like the hands of the damned. As they drew closer, the last, faint sounds of the ocean faded, replaced by a silence so profound it was a ringing in the ears. Their vessel slid onto a beach of fine, black sand and dissolved, its purpose fulfilled. The moment Percy's feet touched the shore, he felt the island's full, horrifying weight. The ground beneath him felt hungry. The air sought to pull the warmth from his blood. And his power, the radiant bahamut flame within him, felt like a solitary candle in an infinite, hurricane-force wind. And then he felt something else. A new sensation, infinitesimally small but impossibly sharp, on the very edge of his global awareness. It was not the suffocating blanket of Astarion's void, nor the clumsy, wide net of Finch's surveillance. This was a single, pure, cold point of intent. It was the feeling of a SN. Iper's crosshairs settling between his shoulder blades. "Kasha," he said, his eyes scanning the dead shoreline. "There's a new player. Something is hunting me. It feels clean, purpose-built." Kasha went unnaturally still. "Finch," she whispered. "He has deployed an asset of the old conclave. A sentry. It is not a warden. It is a conceptual weapon. An idea of a perfect predator, given form. It will not be fast. It will not be slow. It will simply be there when it needs to be. We must finish this before it arrives." Her urgency was a cold spike of alarm, but there was no time to dwell on it. From the shadows between the petrified trees, figures began to emerge. They were shaped like men, tall and broad-shouldered, clad in the armor of ages past. But they were made of solidified shadow, their forms flickering at the edges as if the reality holding them together was a fragile thing. They carried weapons of the same void stuff, a short, heavy sword and a round shield, a massive, two-handed axe, a long, wicked spear. They moved with a silent, inhuman grace, their eyes not burning with malice, but empty, two holes in the fabric of the world. The void forged. They did not roar or issue a challenge. They simply advanced, a silent, implacable tide of negation. The one in the lead, bearing the shield and sword, moved with a familiar, arrogant confidence. Percy could feel the concept that defined it, a singular point of invulnerability, an echo of a legend who could only be harmed in one place. "Achilles," Kasha breathed, identifying the phantom. The shadow Achilles lunged, faster than a demigod. Its void blade of blur aimed at Percy's throat. Percy didn't meet the attack. He raised his bracer, his mind shaping a command. He didn't target the creature's heel. He targeted the very idea of its existence. His will, focused to a razor's edge by the conceptual focus, pulsed outwards. The concept he projected was simple: decay. The shadow Achilles' charge faltered. Its form flickered violently. The edges of its armor, its sword, its very being began to fray, dissolving into black mist. The concept of its invulnerability was being overridden by the higher-order concept of universal entropy. All things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Its charge slowed to a walk, then a stagger, and then, with a final, silent flicker, it dissolved completely, its legend undone by a more fundamental truth. The other two did not pause. The one with the axe, a giant of a man whose aura screamed of brutal, overwhelming strength, Beowulf, swung his weapon in a devastating arc. At the same time, the spear wielder, a phantom of the Irish hero Cú Chulainn, thrust his gaibulb, a weapon whose concept was inescapable death. They were two perfect, killing attacks, one of brute force, one of inescapable fate. Percy couldn't block both, so he blocked neither. He stomped his foot on the black sand, the bracer flaring with light. He projected a new command into the space directly in front of him. A law, that which enters here, finds only itself. He had created a conceptual event horizon, a point of absolute, reflexive reality. The axe of Shadow Beowulf slammed into the invisible point and was met, not by a shield, but by its own perfect, irresistible force. The void axe shattered, the shockwave traveling up the phantom's arms and disintegrating them. The gaibulb, the spear of inescapable death, hit the point and, following its own conceptual imperative, sought its target. But within the space Percy had defined, it was the only target that existed. The spear turned in on itself, piercing the very fabric of the phantom that had thrown it. The shadow Cú Chulainn looked down in what might have been surprise as its own fatal concept unmade it from within. In the space of 5 seconds, 3 legendary heroes, reborn as servants of the void, had been dismantled, not by a greater force, but by a superior logic. Percy lowered his arm, breathing steadily. This was the true nature of his power. He was not a warrior. He was an architect of reality, and his enemies were merely flawed equations he was here to solve. He and Kasha proceeded inland, up the jagged slopes of the island, towards a monolithic citadel of obsidian that seemed to have been grown from the rock rather than built upon it. The silence deepened, and the oppressive, life-draining aura intensified with every step. They passed through a grand, dark archway into the heart of the fortress. The throne room was a vast cavern, open to the storm-racked sky above. There was no ceiling, only the eternal, violent twilight of the void storm. And in the center of the cavern, upon a throne carved from a single, unblemished piece of obsidian that reflected nothing, sat Astarion. He was not the monster Percy had expected. He was a man, dressed in simple, dark clothing. He looked to be in his late 20s, with pale skin, black hair, and eyes that were a calm, startling shade of violet. He was handsome, but it was a cold, statuesque beauty. He did not radiate power, he was a perfect absence of it. The air around him was still, the light bent subtly inwards towards him. He was a human-shaped black hole. He watched them approach, his expression one of serene, intellectual curiosity. He did not move until they stood 20 feet from the dais of his throne. "Perseus Jackson," he said, his voice quiet, yet it filled the vast cavern without an echo. It was a voice of utter calm, devoid of passion or malice. "The new song, I must admit, you are more resonant than I had anticipated." "Astarion," Percy replied, his hand resting on his bracer. "Your song is over." A faint, sad smile touched Astarion's lips. "Is it, or has it simply reached its final, perfect chord? The chord of silence." He gestured to the cavern around them. "Tell me what you see here, dragon son. What do you feel? An absence, an emptiness that wants to consume everything." "I see peace," Astarion corrected gently. "I feel tranquility, the absence of pain, the end of struggle. Every star that shines is a furnace of agonizing fusion. Every world that teems with life is a stage for endless, brutal competition. To live is to suffer. To create is to invite pain. It is the fundamental, tragic flaw of your predecessor's design." He finally stood, his movements fluid and unhurried. "I, too, was once a child of that flawed creation. I loved, I lost. I watched civilizations rise on pillars of hope only to collapse into pits of their own greed and fear. I saw it all, the whole grand, bloody, pointless pageant. And I realized the truth. The only way to save the creation is to uncreate it. To grant it the mercy of non-existence. To return it to the perfect, painless silence from which it was born." He looked at Percy. His violet eyes filled not with hate, but with a profound, weary pity. "You carry the fire of life. You seek to prolong the pageant. You offer them joy, which is fleeting, and hope, which is a lie. In their wake will always come sorrow and despair. I offer a permanent solution. An end to all suffering, for all time. Tell me, Perseus, which of us is the true savior? This was his weapon, not a blade of void, but a perfectly reasoned argument for universal extinction. It was insidious, a philosophical poison that sought to find the cracks in Percy's own resolve. But Percy had been to Tartarus. He had seen true despair, and he had seen the flicker of hope that could survive even there. You call pain a flaw, Percy said, his voice ringing with a new authority, the power of Bahamut resonating in his words. You call struggle pointless. You're wrong. A symphony isn't just the beautiful notes. It's the silence between them. It's the tension and release. The struggle is what gives life its meaning. Taking it away isn't mercy. It's the ultimate act of theft. You're not a savior. You're just a coward who was too afraid to feel. For the first time, a flicker of something other than calm appeared in Asterian's eyes. A flash of cold, ancient anger. The serene mask cracked. You cling to your pain because you have never known the sublime perfection of its absence, Asterian said. His voice losing its gentle tone, becoming as cold and hard as the obsidian throne behind him. I had hoped you, a being of equal but opposite truth, would understand the logic. The beauty of the final equation. But you are just another voice, screaming to be heard in a cacophony that needs to end. He raised a hand. The void energy in the cavern, which had been a passive, oppressive presence, now answered his call. The shadows deepened, coalescing, the silence becoming a physical, crushing force. The air itself began to shimmer and warp, reality fraying at the edges. A pity, Asterian said, his violet eyes beginning to glow with the light of dying stars. The song of creation has always been a discordant, painful noise. It is time for silence. The fight for all of existence was about to begin. And on the edge of his senses, Percy could feel the cold, clean, purpose-built hunter, the sentry, taking its first step onto the black sand of the shore. The clock was ticking. Chapter 9 end. Chapter 10. The first and final note. The battle began not with a clash of energy, but with the death of a concept. Asterian didn't throw a bolt of darkness or summon a monster. Imply looked at the space where Kasha stood and said, his voice the calm of absolute zero, end. For a horrifying instant, Kasha flickered. The concept of her existence, her history, her purpose, her very presence in the tapestry of reality, was being actively, authoritatively erased by a higher command. But the chroniclers were a fundamental principle, woven into the fabric of creation as deeply as the twin dragons themselves. Her form solidified, but the effort was immense. She staggered back, a thin trickle of silver, mercury-like blood running from her nose. Fascinating, Asterian noted with detached, clinical interest. Your pattern is more resilient than I theorized. A foundational constant. No matter. All constants can be eroded. He turned his full attention to Percy, and the passive, oppressive aura of the island became a focused, active weapon. The silence in the cavern became a physical force, pressing in, seeking to crush the song of life in Percy's soul. The air grew so cold that the moisture began to crystallize into floating, fractal patterns of black ice. This wasn't a mere elemental effect. It was the conceptual death of heat, of motion. It was the advance of absolute zero. Percy met the assault with his own fundamental truth. He didn't create a wall of fire or a shield of light. He let the conceptual focus on his arm flare, and he projected a single, unwavering law: life finds a way. Around him, in a 20-foot radius, the black ice sublimated into mist. The crushing silence was held at bay by a low, resonant hum, the sound of a billion cells dividing, of stars being born. Of a universe in the active, vibrant process of becoming. It was a stalemate of absolutes. Two opposing, fundamental truths, made manifest. You seek to build in a universe that is destined to collapse. Asterian said, taking a step down from his dais. He moved without sound or effort, gliding over the obsidian floor. Your every act of creation is a fleeting defiance against an inevitable mathematical certainty, a child's sandcastle against the coming tide. He raised his hand, palm open. From it, a perfect sphere of absolute blackness coalesced. It was not a shadow, it was a hole in the universe. A sphere of pure non-existence that pulled at the light and warped the space around it. He sent it gliding towards Percy. Percy knew instinctively that to touch it Any form of energy would be to have that energy annihilated. To block it with a physical shield would be to have the shield, and his arm, unmade. He had to counter it with a superior concept. His will flowed through the bracer, shaping a new response. He didn't create a weapon. He created a system. A miniature, conceptual solar system materialized in front of him. A tiny, brilliant star of platinum energy, orbited by 9 motes of solidified light. It was a construct of perfect, ordered gravitational and energetic harmony. The sphere of nothingness struck the system. It did not collide. It began to unmake. The outermost orbiting mode of light winked out of existence. But in doing so, the perfect gravitational balance of the system was thrown into chaos. The remaining 8 planets shifted their orbits, their speeds changing, a cascade of complex, relational physics. The system, in its desperation to find a new equilibrium, was actively fighting the sphere's influence, its own internal laws of order resisting the singular law of the void. The sphere consumed another planet, and another, but its advance was slowed to a crawl. It was being forced to unravel a complex, interconnected system, one piece at a time. It was the difference between deleting a single file and trying to erase an entire, self-repairing internet. Order against chaos, Percy stated, pushing his construct forward. System against the void. It's not about permanence, Asterion. It's about the beauty of the system while it lasts. The miniature solar system collapsed in on itself as the sphere consumed its sun. But it had served its purpose. It had bought him time. Time he desperately needed. The feeling of the sentry, the purpose-built hunter, was no longer a distant pinprick. It was a palpable presence, moving through the citadel with an unnerving, silent certainty. Asterion's calm finally broke. A flash of genuine frustration crossed his face. You were an infuriatingly persistent equation. He stopped playing with concepts. He became one. His form dissolved, not into shadow, but into a rift in reality itself, a humanoid-shaped tear in the universe that revealed the pure, starless void beyond. His voice was no longer a human sound, but the whisper of quantum decay, the hiss of a dying cosmos. Less than all songs end. Let this be the last. Greater than. He came at Percy, not as a man, but as a walking, sentient erasure. To be touched by him would be to cease to be. Percy met the charge. The conceptual focus on his arm flared, and his will shaped his final, ultimate form. He was not a dragon of fire and scale. He was a being of pure, structured, platinum light, his form vaguely humanoid but constantly shifting, a cascade of living, interlocking geometry. He was the embodiment of the first note, the Big Bang, the original explosive act of creation. The personification of the final silence met the avatar of the first note. Their collision was an event that had no sound, no light, no physical impact in the conventional sense. It was a conceptual ground zero. The very laws of physics in the cavern were torn apart and rewritten in an instant. For a fraction of a second, life and non-life, existence and non-existence, battled for the right to be the ultimate truth. Percy felt an agony beyond any physical pain. His very being, his memories, his love for his mother, for Annabeth, his loyalty to his friends, all of it was being subjected to the ultimate acid of the void. He was being told, on a fundamental level, that none of it had ever mattered. But he pushed back. He held on to the feeling of his mother's hug, the shared terror and triumph of his quests with Grover, the fierce intelligence and unwavering loyalty in Annabeth's gray eyes. These were not just memories. They were data points. They were proof that his universe of struggle and pain was worth the price. They were the notes in the symphony. Less than it is all just noise. Greater than Asterion's thought screamed into his mind, a wave of cosmic despair. Less than pointless, fleeting noise. Greater than. The noise is the point. Percy roared back, his thought a supernova of defiance. It's the most beautiful noise there is. He poured all of his will, all of his belief in that simple, profound truth, through the bracer. He wasn't trying to destroy Asterion anymore. He was trying to show him. He was trying to make him hear. He focused all the chaos, all the pain, all the love, all the joy of existence into a single, perfect, resonant chord and pushed it into the heart of the void. The rift that was Asterion recoiled. A flicker of Somethi, ing that was not the void, a flicker of the pale-skinned, violet-eyed man, reappeared for an instant. His eyes were wide with a forgotten emotion, shock. He had not just been attacked. He had been understood. And in that instant of hesitation, the sentry arrived. It did not run into the cavern. It was simply there, standing silently at the threshold. It had the shape of a lean, androgynous humanoid, forged from a dull gray metal that seemed to absorb all energy. Its face was a smooth, featureless mask, and in its hands, it held a black iron crossbow, the void bolt already loaded and humming. With a power that made both Percy and Asterion flinch. Its arrival had broken their concentration, their absolute conceptual clash. Percy and Asterion separated, their avatar forms receding, leaving them as two men, panting and drained. In the center of a reality they had almost torn apart. The sentry's featureless mask swiveled, its internal sensors analyzing the scene with cold, inhuman logic. It had one purpose: to erase the greatest power anomaly. And in that moment, the greatest concentration of raw, unstable energy was not Percy, who was the embodiment of a stable, creative system. It was Asterion, the avatar of entropy. The tear in the fabric of the world. With a movement that was neither fast nor slow, but simply inevitable, the sentry raised the crossbow. Asterion looked at the bolt, at the sliver of solidified anti-life aimed at his heart. He looked at Percy, who was staring back, his expression one of exhaustion and dawning horror. In Asterion's violet eyes, for the first and last time, was a flicker of genuine, human fear. He had sought the perfect silence of non-existence, but faced with its cold, mechanical delivery, he balked. "It seems your flawed world has created a tool to enforce my own philosophy," he said, a final, bitter irony in his quiet voice. "How disorderly." The sentry fired. The bolt did not fly. It simply ceased to be at the crossbow and appeared in Asterion's chest. There was no explosion, no scream. Asterion's eyes widened. He looked down at the black bolt. His form began to dissolve, not into void or shadow, but into static. His edges frayed, turning into pixels of fading light. He was being deleted. He looked at Percy one last time, and his lips formed a single, silent word. A word that Percy understood not with his ears, but with his soul. "Listen." Then, he was gone. Not dead, not banished. He was erased from the timeline, from all of history, from the memory of the universe itself. A cosmic retcon. The void dragon was gone. The balance, in the most brutal way imaginable, was restored. The sentry, its primary target eliminated, turned its featureless mask to the next greatest power anomaly in the room. Percy. Percy braced himself. His power reserves almost completely depleted. He had just fought a conceptual war for the soul of the universe. He didn't have the strength for another. But the sentry did not raise its crossbow. It tilted its head, its internal logic processing. The primary threat was gone. The balance had been achieved. Its purpose was fulfilled. With a faint shimmer, its physical form folded in on itself and vanished. Recalled to its stasis chamber by a master who would never know the full truth of what had happened here. Silence, true and absolute, descended on the throne room. The oppressive aura of the void was gone. The storm clouds above began to thin, revealing a sliver of a normal, star-filled night sky for the first time in millennia. Percy sank to one knee, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. Kasha was at his side, helping him up. "It's over," he said, the words feeling hollow. "A balance has been struck," Kasha corrected gently. "The void is not gone. It has merely been returned to its dormant state. The last silence will always be the final truth. But today, the song of creation was loud enough to postpone the ending." Percy looked at the empty throne. He hadn't won. Not really. He had simply argued his point, and a third party had ended the debate. He remembered Asterion's final, silent word. "Listen." He closed his eyes and did just that. He listened, not with his ears, but with his soul, and he heard it. Faint, distant, but undeniable. A new song. The universe, freed from the oppressive, dominant chord of the void, was beginning to improvise. New powers were stirring in the quiet places of the world. Ancient beings, long dormant, were waking up. The departure of the void dragon had not created peace, it had created a power vacuum. He had not won a war. He had simply fired the starting gun for a dozen new ones. He looked at the conceptual focus on his arm, the beautiful, terrible tool that had allowed him to debate a god and win. He was no longer a demigod. He was not a hero. He was a fundamental force of nature, a walking, talking law of reality. And his work, he realized with a dawning, weary certainty, was just beginning. The symphony was just getting started, and he was the conductor, whether he wanted to be or not.